So I was like, yeah, you know, something's wrong with this. I'll take it. There's an old cat here in town who all he does is fix tools, fix generators, fix stuff like that. He's in his 80s, has a little shop, and you know, if you have an old belt sander, that's who you take to, and fixes it up. And I called him and I was like, can you fix a camp stove like this? Oh shit, yeah, bring it back. I haven't yet because, well, COVID,
right.
everything. His shop's always open, so I know he's still kicking. But it's like, well, one of these days I'll get over there after I get my shots. You know,
right.
I haven't done that yet. Mostly,
yeah, it's on my to-do list, but
yeah,
work
it's on the
work.
to-do list. Yeah, work being work, and if it knocks you down for 2 days or a day, you know, my wife got the first shot. She was down for 32 hours. You know, it was hard, and I was like, well, I've got all this other stuff to do. I'll wait till we're in a better spot for that. Whether or not that'll happen,
right?
You know. But probably next week. We've got 3 or 4 clinics in town, and I've got a friend that works for one, and she's like, you know, 8:45 at night, we need 36 more people to come down and get shots. Here we have vaccinations for this 36 more people. Come down, get a shot, get a beer. You know, they have the you know, they had one down at the brewery that was like a mobile vaccination clinic at one of the breweries. You know, go get your shot, and if you're feeling all right, go and get a beer. It's like, win.
Yeah, I just left my parents' place, and then not an hour later, I'm on the road. My mom texts me like, "Hey, the local pharmacy has some extra shots. Are you still in town?" I'm like, "God, come on!"
Right.
But
it was, you know, really tight, and they had the schedule of only this demographic could get in, age or, you know, medical condition or whatever. And then then they extended it. Can't remember what range, like group A, group B, group C, and then everybody else. And for some reason, every county, it didn't talk to any other county. So you know, here in Missoula County, they're going by the numbers. You can only get a vaccine if you're above 75, et cetera, et cetera. But you go to Deer Lodge County, and they can't give them away. Nobody's going into the store. Nobody wants to get, you know, half of it's because there's a bunch of people who think the governments have to get them. And then half people are like, I live on a ranch and I'm pretty self-sufficient. I'm not going into town anyway until, you know, the end of the month. I'm not going in now. Too much to do. So that's where my little sister and her boyfriend drove over there, got their jabs, drove home. Perfect. So
yeah, it's an unseasonably busy year for me in my industry. I typically do 85% of my sales June to October.
Okay.
And I am 29% over where I was last year to date in sales. And it's just nuts.
What do you sell?
I work in the paint and coatings industry.
Okay.
Now that we're streaming live, I'm not going to say who because they monitor the social media world heavily.
Oh, sure. Everybody does.
Yeah.
Everybody does, I'm sure.
Well, you hear stories about it when you go to headquarters for training. And nobody believes it. But then we had one of our guy that I used to work with indirectly went to one of our vendors factory, and they do a tour, and you're supposed to take your cell phone and put it in this little, you know, the blocking box or whatever, and then they give you the tour and you get your cell phone at the end. Well, he took it with him, or his extra one with him, took photos. It was on Facebook less than 24 hours before they got a call from their corporate office to our corporate office saying, take this off yesterday or you're fired. It's like, oh, they do monitor that.
Yeah. I was on a project where the person who was working with us, she'd never been on a project before out in the Southwest. She was new to the crew. We didn't really know anything about her. And she took some pictures of rock art that we found. Sorry, I got something in my eye.
No worries.
She took some pictures of some rock art that we found, which was pretty significant. Like it was one of those, I've only seen a painting of that painting kind of thing. And she posted pictures of this rock art, which probably would have been fine because the company I was working for at the time had their policy was you can't show like identifiable features. You can't take a landscape picture and have the mountains in the background because somebody can extrapolate where you are. And she posted these pictures, and we got back to the field vehicle, and I'm like getting into the truck, and my phone beeps because I had just enough signal to get a message. It's from my boss, and it's in all capital letters. He's like, "You guys are done for the day. Head back to the hotel. I will meet you there." And I'm like,
oh shit.
And it came in like, he'd sent it like 10 minutes before. I'm like, that's a 2.5 hour drive for him. It was an hour drive for us. And we got there, and he's pacing. And it was what she had written. She had tagged all of us, and she tagged him and the company. Who? It comes down, delete everything. He looks at the three of us that he likes because we worked for him before. He's like, go private on your social media, untag yourself, delete yourself, all this stuff. Do not, because it was incredibly insensitive, and it was really just not professional at all. And as far as I know, that individual never got another job in the field. So,
okay, jeez.
Yeah, I mean,
sorry to interrupt you there.
no worries.
We're about 7 minutes in here. I figure we should probably do introductions.
Yeah, you actually sent me an outline. It's all real. Let's be professional about it.
Well, we're
go by what the paperwork says.
If you listen to another show called Department of Defense from the same studio, we are a far cry from professional.
Oh, sure.
But Morgan, welcome to Rules of the Arena. Appreciate you taking the time out of the weekend to be on here.
Oh, of course. Thanks for having me.
And I've been following you on TikTok for I think probably fall of last year.
Okay.
You tearing apart some, what was it? Something about Oak Island, I think it was.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Which one?
You're right. Yeah. And I just about fell out of my chair laughing at it, because I've never subscribed to the conspiracy theory realm. I mean, aliens, Bigfoot, I'd say a skeptical believer at best. Like, as soon as I see it with my own 2 eyes, fine, then sure.
Yeah, that's
but
completely
until
different.
Then, I mean, here we are in 2021, and nobody can take a high res photo.
Yeah.
Blows my mind.
Yeah, that's truth. Yeah, I'm the same way. If when it shows up, when there's proof of it, when it's it's tactile in my hand, right. Sure. Until then, I'm not going to put that much effort into really pushing that envelope until it actually says something.
Right. I just wanted to have you on the show and give you a little bit more than 59 seconds to talk about whatever we feel like.
Yeah.
But do you just want to introduce yourself to listeners that are fortunate enough to not be on TikTok, for as great as that app is?
Right. Sure. My name's Morgan Kinnie. I'm an archaeologist operating out of Missoula, Montana. I work for a federal land agency, but I'm not going to say which one, because there is a guy that says, hey, I tell you what we can put on TV and what we can't, or whatever. And I'm a real archaeologist, not what you see on television.
You mean Dr. Graham Hancock is not real?
I so want him to be, because punch and error is boring. Yeah, he's not an archaeologist, so that's the fun part about it, is that everyone is like, oh, he knows everything. It's like, but he's not.
Right.
Do you want an electrician taking out your appendix, or a doctor? That's kind of the way I look at some of this stuff, because I have so many people kind of push, oh, well, what about this, or what about these things? And it's like, well, where's it coming from? Mm-hmm. And that's one of the big things for me, is when you look at a thing, okay, the thing's cool, where's it come from? Because you can tell a lot about the intent of something. If you find something and it's amazing and it has very little coverage or very little attention or whatever, just because, take your reason, it hasn't been heavily researched or something like that, then it's kind of like, okay, this is curious. Why hasn't it been looked at? what are the things that come together? What are the things that, all line up for it to exist? That makes sense. But, I saw it on Facebook, or a guy who doesn't know what he's talking about, or never took a class, or never, showed that they have an awareness of how the industry actually works, is going to tell me something about my job. It's like, okay.
Well, one of my favorite memes out on the internet was everything you read on the internet is true, and it's quoted by Abraham Lincoln.
Oh yeah, right. Yeah, no, and that's a joke I played with. I'm sure you've seen. Oh, it's on the internet. It's obviously
right.
It's obviously true.
So from Montana, what was life like growing up out in those neck of the woods?
Outside. That's oh yeah. I'm gonna tell you right now, I'm going to be probably the most anomalous person you've had on your podcast. I have never owned a game console.
No kidding. You're lucky.
I'm 37. I've never owned a game console. My brother had a Game Boy, and when he graduated high school, he bought Nintendos. But I never had them. So when people are like, "Oh, I played this video game, all this stuff," I'm like, no. So I was always outside. I went to the proverbial it was 3 room schoolhouse,
Wow.
32 or 36 kids, kindergarten through 8th grade. Went there for a couple years, homeschooled for 2 years. My high school graduating class was 50 kids. My grandparents owned a ranch, so I grew up doing ranch work. But when I was a kid, my dad was a logger, and then in the mid 90s, logging in Montana kind of dried up for half a dozen reasons that all have not worked out the greatest for those, I'm sure, who had it planned. And heavy equipment operator now, so we moved around the state a couple times, and it was always go outside, go play outside. So it was, when you think of Montana, it's Huck Finn without the river,
right?
And always shoes on, because the dry grass out here just poke a hole right through the sole of your foot. So
I haven't been out to Montana for a long time. I'm going to be 33 this year. I think I was 8 years old. My parents took me out to Glacier for the first time.
Okay.
And
I can't remember Glacier.
I would not hate retiring out there someday.
Bring a lot of money.
Right.
But especially with like COVID right now, so many people have moved here. I mean, immense numbers of people. There are no houses for sale. They don't even hit the market. They don't even hit the newspaper. They're sold. There's houses for sale that the best thing to do would be to light them on fire and bulldoze them. They're not worth anything. And they're selling for $300,000 because somebody from Texas is like, I'm going to run away to Montana where the virus can't follow me. And they bring their extended family, and it's Uncle Bob and Jeb went down to the bar drinking, and they got COVID because nobody was wearing a mask, and they bring it with them. So, but before that, even there's nothing here. There's the main industry is tourism. Logging is pretty thin because of just the way things went in the mid 90s, where all these regulations came in and no one was given a chance, it seems, to actually adapt to them. It was hey, we want to do A, B, and C for the logging industry to make it less destructive, because it is. But if you do it right, it's just like farming, Well, it was we want to do this, and you guys have to have it figured out next Friday. The equivalent of that. So there was just a lot of that collapse. Ranching, you barely break even. I mean, ranching is not a get rich sort of thing.
Right.
And then, you know, like I guess Bozeman has a huge or a very large tech industry right now, but you either got to have a really good job that allows you to work from home, or you better be in the medical profession, because a full-time job here is $12 an hour, you know, and you need to work 2 full-time jobs to pay for an apartment,
Right.
you know. The only reason that we have this house is that my wife inherited it from her parents, and that was it. Otherwise, we would be spending somewhere north of $1,400 on an apartment or a rental house big enough, and we wouldn't be able to have half the animals we do, and no yard to speak of, because you see people are like, oh, I can make $500,000 on 2 lots if I cut my backyard in half. So then these little houses that are this wide but this tall all grow up, and it's just like, looks like somebody just stacked some corrugated tin straight up in the ground. It's like, what is that? Oh, modern housing.
Right.
But it's still pretty wild out here. Drive 5 minutes and there's no people.
Right.
It's kind of
and that's the part that I like. You know, being this is almost a little over 20 years in customer service and sales. I'm checked out, and I still have a long ways to go.
Yeah. No. Yeah. You gotta take care of yourself.
Right.
Take a trip sooner rather than later.
Right.
Before you get burned up. Yeah.
Well, then that's what I try to do. I take an extended weekend every quarter, and then once or maybe twice a year, get out of the 5-state area.
Sure.
Except for last year, that kind of got screwed up a little bit, but
yeah, well, most everything got screwed up last year.
2019 did a shotgun tour of national parks in Colorado and Utah for a week.
Okay, that's cool.
That was fun. Celebrate with the buddy's wedding at the end of it. A little beat up, being held together with KT tape and moleskin, but
yeah, that's just part of the day,
right? But when did you first start to become interested in history as general, and how did that lead into archaeology and anthropology?
Probably when I was a wee little kid. So one of the things, you know, being far out in the middle of nowhere, you know, growing up in Florence when I was first and second grade, and then or second, third grade in Florence, I think, and then, you know, 4th and 5th grade in Hall, which is that big, you know. Before the internet, there's nothing to do. And, you know, I moved out to these places, you know, because my parents moved us out there. And I found out about 3 years ago why we moved to Hall. And my mother looked me square in the eyes and went, we moved out there because your dad's a paraman, and that's where his family's from. And I was like, who? You know, this is not our family.
Right.
So we moved out to Hall, and I was the only not rancher's kid. You know, there was one other kid whose father wasn't a rancher, and his dad was a railroader. So, but they had all grown up together. Here I am walking in, what was it, you know, 11, 12, and I'm this odd duck out of everything. So I read a lot of books. And when we would leave Hall and we go back to the Bitterroot to see my mother's parents, my grandparents who had the ranch, if I wasn't out doing work and helping my grandfather, I would be in the house with no cable TV, no movies, no VCR. I mean, this is my grandparents. They read books. So I would sit down with these books that, you know, a normal kid is not going to sit down and read. And first, you know, you're flipping through because, oh, the pictures are cool. And then you actually start reading the captions under the pictures. And then you start reading the book itself. So while kids are reading, like, I didn't read Tolkien until I was in my 20s. But I read everything about James Cook and Magellan and all of those time life books. I don't know if you remember those. The ones that come in the series, like the loggers and the cowboys and the miners, and, you know, that's 25 volumes, and it's all modern information in 1952. So it's not even relevant anymore. You know, you're reading some of it, and my grandfather gave me those books. I was flipping through it, and I'm looking at them like the language in it. If I were to read a passage on TikTok, I'd be canceled for they would come down and they'd bury me in concrete somewhere, because it's obviously not written for 2020 or 2021. It's using the vernacular from back then, which is not the kindest. And of course, you know, like James Cook and Lewis and Clark and colonization and stuff is all glazed over, because it's nobody's loud enough to hear the other side yet.
Mm-hmm.
But those were the books I was reading. You know, the one that sticks in my head, and I actually got another copy from my tattoo artist, who was cleaning out his uncle's house. It was called Men, Ships, and the Sea. As a National Geographic book written by this guy named Alan Villers, who died in like 1975. But it was a collection of articles and stories that he actually wrote for National Geographic during his tenure as a oceanic journalist, starting in the 20s. Like his first voyage was him and a buddy decided to sign up for the sailing ship that left Australia, sailed around the Horn, 1923 or 4, one of the last grain runners. His buddy died halfway through the voyage, got crushed in an accident, and he never went home, never went back to land. He was a sailor in the Navy, in the Royal Navy, and all of these articles, the start was the earliest man. Give a man something that floats, and he will build himself a boat. That's the first line of that book. And then it went through history, you know, little men, you know, indigenous peoples figuring out how rafts might work, regardless of where you are on the planet. You know, early people figuring out rafts, and then you go through history and you wind up the Greeks at the Battle of Salamis, and then they have this. There was an article in there, and this is what really kind of got me into underwater archaeology, was a shipwreck that Jacques Cousteau discovered off the coast of Minorca, I think, and it's pretty basic. You know, oh, look at the amphorae, look at the pottery, look at all this stuff. The ship itself is largely gone, but you know, 2,100 years old. Oh, that's cool. And it went all the way up through, you know, Magellan, James Cook, Christopher Columbus, all the way up dreadnoughts in the First World War to nuclear powered aircraft carriers, and the modern age when this book was written, which the third edition, which is the first one I had, published in 1968. So, you know, it's the height of the Cold War, where the blurb about the nuclear powered aircraft carrier is that big because you can't let state secrets out. You know, and books like that. So there were some of those books that were ancient Egypt, you know, Howard Carter quality archaeology. So very, very much looking at it through this colonial lens that, you know, is heavily influenced by the British mindset. You know, you didn't have a lot of Egyptian archaeologists who are from Egypt and indigenous to Egypt at that time period. You had helpers. You know, you had the guys that knew everything, and because you were British, you just claimed what they said as yours and wrote a book. So all of that stuff is what I had to grow up with, and okay, it's cool, and it was very interesting to me. And that's where I was going to be a historian, or I was going to be an archaeologist. Indiana Jones, of course, is a movie that we all know. I love that movie. And not once did I actually think that's what archaeology was, but yeah, I like that movie. And then as I, you know, growing up, I got really interested in finding things. Old cars were always just cool. I love old airplanes, as you can tell. That was fostered when I was a kid too, because some of those books were like the old Jane's complete schematic books where you know, for target identification that my grandfather had from the 50s. Just really, you know, stuff that I really liked. And, you know, I get into high school, cars and girls kind of steer me away from all that history stuff. But then I go to college and I go, I don't know what I want to do. And I struggled for a couple of years, and I was going to be a journalist, but I couldn't ever commit to, yes, I'm going to major in journalism, until somebody said, well, why don't you be an archaeologist? And I blinked and I went, you can do that? So yeah, I went into the anthropology department, got the course list, looked at it, and was like, well, I've taken this one and this one. Win. Okay. And then I started doing that, and I worked through that, took a couple years off because I got burned out, then went back, crushed it, and started working in the field. So yeah, it's always, I've always had my nose in a book, I guess. I can't hear you.
Helps if I, unmute after I cough.
Oh, sure. Yeah, no, it's like, uh-oh.
No, so what's the pipeline from you have your degree and then going about and actually getting a job in the field and getting a chance to work out in the field, of course?
For me or in general?
In general, or for you, both.
Well, for me, I actually started doing archaeology work during my undergrad. And it was work study. So I got paid some paltry wage. And then it was volunteer, and then it was internship, and then it was a paid internship, which is different than work study. And I was doing the lab work. So artifacts in a curation space, either cleaning them, identifying them, repacking them. There's a standard you have to pack artifacts in. Can't use paper with any acid in it. You can't use, have to use Smithsonian spec things, and this is based on their entire preservation program at the Smithsonian. And that's all repositories are kind of held to that bar. So when I started, actually one of my best friends was doing her master's thesis, and she was taking the entirety of the repository at the University of Montana and taking it from essentially a bunch of boxes down in the basement that hadn't been looked at for, well, we were curating boxes from dig sites during the WPA era of the Depression.
Jeez.
So, archaeological projects when they were building Grand Coulee Dam, stuff like that. We were actually turning all of those into searchable, preserved collections. And then there was a bunch of repatriation stuff that was involved in that, because there's a lot of artifacts and boxes with people in them that that just got lost, because not because the records were missing or didn't exist. It was they were in a box somewhere and no one knew where to look. And that's what her project was. So when I first started, I kind of, the buggy whip is what I got first before getting the horse and the cart. I got the buggy whip, which is you start in the lab and no field work at all. And then because I had to take a field school for graduation, I got some field experience, but because I was, I didn't have the resources to take 6 weeks and go dig in the woods and not work, I couldn't do a field school. So I did an independent study, but because I was doing all this internship work, I got to go out, instead of be in the lab, go out for like a week and be essentially a teacher's assistant. But that's how I got my introduction to, oh, hey, here's field work. You're digging a meter by meter square in the ground and you're going down in 5 centimeter increments or soil change increments, digging into the ground. And this is how you're collecting artifacts and recording everything within the field. And then I graduated, and wouldn't you know it, I didn't do archaeology for a year. I got a job that actually paid somewhat decently, and it involved cars and a very large machine that I could pick up cars with and then maybe drop them. So it was like, this is good. I'll figure it out. I'll get some bills paid. And then I had an opportunity to go to Arizona. Yes. So I packed up my dog, packed up my Toyota, parked that green Dodge and pickup at my mom's house because it was just going to be too damn slow, and drove down there. I applied for a job in January. My idea was to go down in May. My wife was my girlfriend at the time. Now my wife was already down there, and this was like I'm going to work and I'm going to get some money saved up, and then I'll be down. Well, I applied for a bunch of archaeology jobs, not expecting to get them because I had no experience in the field. And I got a job. I got a phone call on like a Thursday night, and it was the principal investigator of this job. And she was like, so this is the project we're working on. I sent you an email. Did you get it? Yes. She's like, when can you be here? I'm like, don't you want to interview me? And she's like, yeah, I read your resume. When can you be here? Well, Tuesday. And she's like, project starts Monday. I'll accept Tuesday. See you then. Click. Crap. So that was the load my truck. That was the throw stuff into storage. That was the, get in the truck and just burn tires all the way down there. And I got down there like Sunday night or Monday morning, sometime really late, really early, still dark. I got outside of Buckeye, which is where I was going to be, where my girlfriend lived at the time. And either my phone was dead or something. I slept in the Walmart parking lot. And then I pulled into the driveway, saw her, hugs, kisses, celebrate for a little bit. And the next morning I am out the door at 3:30 in the morning to drive 52 miles to the office where I meet this crew of people that I've never met before. And they're like, good, get in the truck. Out to the job site. But that was, I graduated and I started looking for a job in what's called cultural resource management, which is like everyday archaeology. There's academic, which is, the school is involved. You're the professor, you're excavating a site for academic purposes, et cetera, and so forth, preservation purposes because of its significance, and it's all being run by a university. And then there's cultural resource management archaeology, which is you're the people in front of the bulldozer, and you have 15 minutes to record what you're looking at before that bulldozer runs you over. I kid you not, that's how it is sometimes. So any of these big projects, highway projects, in fact, the first job I worked was a highway project. You have to have archaeologists go through and mitigate all the cultural sites. So that's anything. That's indigenous sites, that's historic sites with European Americans involved, that's rock art, that's, anything that humans have touched. And if you consult with one of the tribes and they say, this particular mountain has a bunch of cultural stories tied to it, yeah, you can't build a road on that mountain if they have their say. And that's something that okay. So that's how we can look at an area and actually how these projects kind of get, they get planned out, and then they bid the job to get looked at and processed. I've worked for companies where the research work is done by a different firm, and then the field work is done by somebody else, and the curation work is done by somebody else because they all bid the contract, just like any contract sort of position. And that was on a website. That was on an archaeology fieldwork website. And you submit your resume or your CV, and you apply like anything else. But it was an archaeology specific job board. And from then on, once I was in, I knew a bunch of I guess big players for the area. People who ran their own who were in charge of projects, who could actually have hiring authority. One of the guys I worked with at the first job, he was the boss that came driving out when that girl made a mistake for a completely different company. And he left a month before I did because he got a better job opportunity. And so it became really more of I would see a job listing, and then I would call the person that I already knew was working the job and say, hey, do you guys need more people? When's this project happening? Here's my resume. So kind of, you know, word of mouth more than anything. But once you get into an area and you're knowledgeable about it, you're on a short list. And, you know, and then like government jobs, which is what I do now, you go on the government website and you type in archaeology and it'll bring up everything with that word involved. There was a really terrible job I saw advertised. You have to spend the whole summer floating the Grand Canyon over and over and over again. Terrible. Everything paid for by the job, you know. Oh no, camping in the Grand Canyon? Terrible. But because you were going to be there and you're going to be a park ranger, they want you to have some sort of archaeological knowledge. Okay, cool. Read a book on the indigenous people of the Grand Canyon, you're caught up. But yeah, so it's pretty easy if you want to go higher than just being a field person, you know, a field technician or a shovel bum, which is the colloquial term. You need to go higher in your education. You know, you need a master's. When you have a master's, you can get a permanent position, which means, like, if you work for a federal agency, you will be the one in the office who takes all of the work that's done by the field people and collate it into the reports and the records and all of that stuff. You'll be the one to talk to. You'll be the person to talk to about projects. Like the agency I work for now, my boss sits at the table every year during the public land use conversations with the people who work in the forestry department and the fisheries people and the wildlife biology people, and they all come together with this big game plan on land use that looks at every aspect of land management, you know. So you can get out of the field and get into an office really quick if your education's high enough. And then if you want to teach, you can do adjunct positions, I think, with an MA. It depends on the school. But you would need a PhD to be a professor. Right. So that might be in the works. I don't know. Maybe.
So what's a typical day in the life for you then, out in the field?
Well, when I'm going out in the field, it's wake up and do the all important morning ritual, making coffee so I don't kill the first person at the gas station who's in the way of a churro, you know. Just you know, depending on the project. I mean, sometimes you camp, sometimes you're already out there on the project, but usually it's when you get to the office, you see what the day plan is, and usually if it's an excavation project, you just go out and where you're assigned and you start digging, and you're keeping all your own notes, and you know, you have X amount of supplies to bag artifacts and everything. And like when I was working in Arizona, there was a person with a GPS, and he had the stick, he had the wizard staff and the GPS, and he would come and he would plot everything on the site, in addition to measuring out every single wall, every single, you know, he'd walk the perimeter of what we were considering the site, which is just looks like an amoeba when you put it on a map. And then you have specifically somebody who's entering all of this handwritten data into a tablet or a laptop. And then you have somebody who's specifically cataloging all of the artifact numbers and assigning new artifact numbers. So I was excavating a room in this Pueblo complex for 8 feet by 7 feet, you know, not a very big room. But I went through, you know, 1,050 to 2,500, and then 3,501 to, you know, 3,570 in regards to numbers in that same hole in the ground, because somebody else would get the next segment of numbers because they got done before I did, or, you know, and there's somebody making sure that all of that data that ties the artifacts I found to room F stay within that room in the digital record. So you have somebody specifically doing that. I work for the feds, which means, oh, I can do all of that myself. So I've got a GPS, I've got the tablet, and it bounces between everybody on the crew. You know, I mean, somebody, if it's a Monday, Kyle gets the camera and the photo log. Kyle, if you don't take good pictures, you're fired. You know, they get to take pictures for the day. Somebody else will be doing the GPS stuff. Everybody's taking notes. And then at some point, you'll collate all that in the office. But we're usually out the door on the road as the sun's coming up. And we'll get out to the field. Sometimes it's a 10-minute drive. Sometimes it's an hour-and-a-half drive. Sometimes you're only going 10 miles, but it's an hour-and-a-half drive because the road's that bad. You know, be glad it's not your truck and it's the office truck, right, thing. And then we'll survey areas based on what the project needs are. Timber sales. You know, if there's stuff on the ground that the machines can ruin, we got to make sure the machines won't run over them, mark them out, and assess kind of what we're doing while in the field. If we think we should excavate something, we'll say, hey, it might be worth putting a test pit here to see what it'll turn up. Because you get into a lot of these areas and the underbrush is, you know, so dense. We, in our office, you have to do 10% is considered good faith effort. And I've been in areas where the 10% is 4 feet off the road because you can't see any further because of the deadfall. And I mean, we've walked right up on bull elk and they stand up 6 feet in front of you. And you're like, where'd you come from? They just appear from a hole in the ground. No, he was laying there and you couldn't see him because he looked like a pile of brush, you know. You can't see anything on the ground. You're not going to see an arrowhead or a flake that's that big, right, in grass 4.5 feet tall. Now, if we go through an area and we make sure, you know, you can find a cabin in that. Okay, so that we found a cabin. It's been protected. We've recorded everything. And the smoke jumpers go in and do a prescribed burn fire, and they save the cabin, but everything else has been cooked off pretty well. Then we go back in. Oh man. And it's amazing what we find, you know, that was never, that you would never have seen it. You could have stepped right in the middle of it. You never would have seen it until that underbrush is gone. And then, oh man, there's lots more there. But we record it. We try to leave everything in situ. We don't want to disturb it any more than we absolutely have to. And then we go back to the office and upload everything. And as the season progresses, we'll start collating, you know, one office day a week will be turned or work day a week will be turned into an office day where we have to start writing reports. We have to start turning the data we have into site forms and reports so we can then come up with a protection plan or we can come up with a mitigation plan. Obviously, we can't save everything. So these 3 things, yeah, the road can go through it because we've seen all of it before. It's not that unique, or, you know, it can't be helped. What do we have to do if it can't be helped? Go out and excavate it, you know, record it as best we can, take all the artifacts with us, document them, curate them, put them in the repository. So 100 years down the road, somebody can look at that box and go, oh, I wonder what's in there. And then try to look through our old notes and go, I don't know what this is. You know, which is kind of a nightmare, but that's kind of what it is sometimes. So
in the artifacts that you're finding, I mean, and you record them, or if you save and move them off site after all the data is taken, I mean, what happens to them from there? Is it going into a museum or some sort of?
A lot of them, no. They get taken to a repository that's run by either a state agency or like a university. So like the University of Montana, for a long time was a repository for artifacts that were dug up by the Forest Service and Department and like Bureau of Land Management and the Department of Natural Resources west of Butte. All of the artifacts they excavated would go to the repository at the University of Montana. And they're there for research. If you are a researcher, you get the proper permissions and credentials to go into the repository. You can go in and utilize those in your research. If it's one of the tribes, they have the ability to utilize and access those things. Some of the things get used as teaching collections, or as part of your internship or your work study, you're doing, they're being used as a teaching tool in some fashion. And then sometimes there's small museum displays at the university, but they're not going to wind up in the Smithsonian.
Mm-hmm.
If there's a museum in town that wants to have a display, wants to do an exhibit on artifacts of Western Montana, mining artifacts of Western Montana, they can approach the repository and present essentially the plan of what they want, the project plan, and get artifacts on loan, which has a huge paper trail that they have to follow, and they'll be on display for X number of days or months or whatever, and then they'll go back to the repository. Sometimes it's like where the Ark went in Indiana Jones. It's a government building, and it's all on shelves. It's all in a computer database somewhere, and it just goes sits on a shelf,
right,
and you never see it again. But we can't take stuff home. That's a no-no. You get in trouble for that.
But everybody says that you guys are just collecting and selling it off and becoming rich off those artifacts.
We can't do that. That's against the law. And if you notice, I'm not rich. Believe me, if there was a chance to breathe a little easier when it comes bill time every month,
right?
I'd feel better about it. But no, we don't. So artifacts, if they are extremely significant to the indigenous groups in the area, and graves, grave goods, those automatically go back to the tribe. Period. The end. We can't take pictures. We can't take pictures of a burial.
Mm-hmm.
The artifacts that are in a burial, doesn't matter if the artifact is found and it's not in anybody's hand, it's not on the remains themselves. If it's in the hole with the human remains, we can't even take pictures of it. I have beautiful memories of arrowheads that were obsidian, but they were so thin you couldn't tell that it was obsidian hardly. It was the faintest smoky color of black in it. They were all made specifically. I don't know what you would use this for to hunt. They were the size of my thumbnail,
mm-hmm,
but they were a grave good. Couldn't take pictures of. All that stuff goes back to the tribes, unless the tribe says, "Hey, we understand that this is actually important to our own knowledge and learning about our past," which of course has been so disrupted in the last 250 years, where pictures are allowed to be taken or more work is allowed to be done. But usually, at least in my experience, if you find a burial, you've got 24 hours to get it out of the ground, recorded out of the ground. You can't use anything unnatural. So you can't use ink. You can't use plastic. You can't use tape or staples. It's paper and linen and like hemp twine and for packaging everything up. And it goes right back to the tribe for reburial. Historic artifacts, a lot of the times we leave them there. If we have to excavate a historic site, we pick and choose, because it's a bit of a nightmare when you find a can dump and there's 5,000 tin cans that are the same tin cans today as they were in 1875, and you don't need another 2,000 bean tins in a box somewhere. They'll leave them. But if you find one really cool bottle or some pretty distinctive ceramic or something that's unique in what you're looking at, oh, this is actual Japanese porcelain, or Chinese porcelain, actually hand painted, and this piece has survived with just a crack in it. that'll get collected because of its significance. It might be the only one. But yeah, no, we don't sell them. We can't just get rid of, we can't throw stuff away. And there's a funny story about that I can tell you if you want to hear it. It's ridiculous. When I was doing my undergrad and we're working in the repository, we started looking at a bunch of field school excavations. So the notebooks, the site forms, and all of the artifacts, which had literally been dug up out of the ground. They brushed some of the dirt off and they said, this is cool. They put it in a paper bag and they put it in a box. And the paper bags maybe had the site number written on them. And they were, the only thing we knew about them is that they were from 1988, this field school that was done in 1988 at Garnett Ghost Town. And that's all we knew. Didn't know which building, didn't know which, where in the town site was this from? How deep was it? All of that provenance data, there's that word again. I know we're going to get to that.
Yeah.
All this data that I'm very, very used to collecting wasn't there. Wonderful. Well, as we're going through, there's like 10 or 11 boxes. And then there was this last box that didn't have any writing on it, but it had been curated as a box of artifacts. So we open it up and it is the lunch trash from a week of field school lunches from 1988. Those little packages with the cheese and the breadsticks? Yeah, that packaging hasn't changed at all. And we're looking at it. Oh, great. This is all trash. It's literally trash. What are we going to do with it? Bag it and tag it. You mean we can't throw it away? Fire him. I mean, we couldn't throw it away. So what we have to do is not collect it. So there'll be stuff that, we're just not going to go, we're not going to collect it. But we can't sell it. When we have it, we can't dispose of it. It's on the shelf for the rest of existence. So until it becomes an artifact again, 1,000 years from now. But yeah, the selling of artifacts is pop culture, Indiana Jones, old archaeology thing. The field has changed progressively as you go through.
I think the big story, the most recent one that I know of, and I'm sure other people heard of, was it Nick Cage bought a T-Rex skull and turned out it was stolen from whatever collection or something like that.
Oh, it's not just Nick Cage. So being a T-Rex skull, that's a good distance outside of my wheelhouse. Mm-hmm. It's Dinosaur. Archaeologists don't dig up dinosaurs.
Year difference there.
just a bit. But there was a guy. Do you remember Forrest Fenn? Did you ever hear of him?
Not off the top of my head. It might be in the recesses of my mind somewhere, but
Forrest Fenn was this guy for this collector / oil guy or something. He had a lot of money in New Mexico, and he found out he had terminal cancer in the early 90s. And he decided he was going to take a bunch of his wealth and he was going to encourage people to explore. So he made a treasure map, or he made a treasure, and he buried it somewhere. And then he released, it was first 8 clues, and then he released another clue after 10 years because nobody had found it. Then he released another one. So there were 10 clues. And flat out in his the little blurb, the little poem he wrote, it's not in a well, it's not in a cemetery, it's not under somebody's house. And he made it, he put it on public land somewhere. It was found, I don't know where, I want to say in Colorado, but I mean, I have no idea where. But in that search, people were going off base and digging where they weren't supposed to. And there's actually a guy who last year got busted because not only was he digging on federal land, he was digging a military cemetery outside of Yellowstone. So like the guys buried there are old cavalry horse guys, you know what I mean? This is an old site. And he caused a bunch of damage to the graves. He took a bunch of stuff. Oh, look at this metal. I'm out metal detecting what I find. Old belt buckle. It was around some trooper's waist, but you know, I mean, who cares? You know, he's not going to miss it, obviously. But he got in a lot of trouble, and he was in violation of the Archaeological Resources Protection Act, the ARPA Act. And the more people have gone out, especially last year with COVID, and people thinking the only place to be safe is away from other people, so we're going to go out in the woods. Those ARPA cases are piling up because it also, I mean, it's, you know, digging archaeological sites that are discovered and known about. There was a cave complex in Utah that in the 60s, I think, the archaeologists excavating it were like, this is so important, we need to stop. So they put a cast iron grate over the hole. You could not get in. Somebody went in and cut the bars and looted that site down to sterile soil, destroyed it completely. And it was 11,000 something years old. It was ancient. Baskets in place. It took it all.
Why?
You know,
it's like,
because somebody actually. This is
why we can't have nice things.
This is exactly why. But you know, because somewhere somebody paid money for something,
right?
And has now set a precedent. You know, and that's unfortunately, you know, early on. You know, one of the things about archaeology is that it's very colonial, and there's lots of people that'll say specifically that it's a tool of colonialism. Well, the first recorded archaeologist is Nabonidus II, who's a pre-Persian king. He's like a Babylonian king. Because there was a fascination back then, 300 years ago, with what came before.
Mm-hmm.
So he's the first recorded archaeologist. And for a lot of the time, and I mean, granted, you know, the European powers did accordingly take stuff away. The only glimmer of anything in what they did is the fact that a lot of areas where they did take stuff have seen a lot of strife. And like with the giant Buddhas in Iran that were dynamited by the Taliban or ISIS or something because of, you know, idol worship or whatever they thought. Is it at the very least, there's a small picture when the British went in and excavated all these places and like, oh, this is great stuff. We're going to take it back to the museum and put it on display. No one here is going to care, because if they cared, they would have done it themselves, whatever that mindset is. But that used to be, you know, early, you know, in the 1800s and early 1900s. Yeah, that's what people did. There's archaeology, and then there's Indiana Jones. And that Indiana Jones is the only one that people see because that was adventure. That was big. That was, you know, kids listened to stories like that on the radio during the Depression. That was a hero thing. And then we have the movies. When did the first one get made? The early 80s. Yeah. It goes from the radio, you know, from the radio shows to those, and it's just the same vein as the pulp novels and radio serials that really got everybody razzed up, and it's great entertainment. But unfortunately, there's a lot of people who can't make the distinction between entertainment and reality. Obviously, they got their idea from something, so it's got to come from something. Well, Indiana Jones takes place in the 30s, and then the last one we don't like takes place in the 40s. That emulates that time period, but it's not what we do today. So, yeah, somewhere somebody thought it was okay, and that's why, like, I've called it, like, you've been watching my TikToks. I've called some people out that have done naughty things.
I've seen people. I'm just out and about, and I have a metal detector, so it's and I'm on public land, so it's okay. It's like, well, actually,
it's not as okay as everybody thinks, and you'll get people who will argue that, oh, it's public land. Why can people tell us what to do on public land if it's public land? And that's literally well, if you ruin it for everybody,
right, it
stops being public land. It stops, one person stole a cookie out of the cookie jar. Everybody in the classroom is now in trouble. So, but yeah, there have been I actually ran into a guy at Garnet Ghost Town one day, and he's sitting in his truck and his buddy's walking around the town, and in the back of their truck is metal detectors and shovels and screens. And I know exactly what they're doing, because guess what? On projects, we've used metal detectors and shovels and screens, because, we're looking for specifically historic things. And yeah, we'll get a ping. And then if we excavate it like we do in a meter by meter square, down increments, and excavate it properly, with taking all of that data collection that we do, and that people don't realize that we do. And this guy was sitting there and he's looking really suspicious, and I walk up to him, and I'm in a truck with government plates. It's like, what are you doing? Oh, nothing. I'm like, you got metal detectors in the back, and there's a sign right there. You say can't metal detect. Oh, they're just back there. I'm like, this is like having a loaded rifle in a zoo. I'm not doing nothing, but but that gazelle's looking mighty tasty. I mean, so yeah, yeah, unfortunately. And I've had people on TikTok send me videos where people are pulling artifacts out of the bank, out of the water. And I can go on about it until I'm blue in the face, but I don't know where those places are, because not every state is the same. Federal land is the same, regardless where you are. But like, I know in Missouri, I think you can walk river channels and water and flowing water channels and pick up artifacts, but you can't in Virginia or Montana, or and if you're on public land, or not public land, but private land, and you pick up artifacts, the private landowner can send you to jail for theft unless you have permission. And are people getting permission? Where are they at, so I can check the laws? Oh, suddenly they're in a state that allows it. It's like, oh, I didn't know, except for these laws have been around for a long time. So there's an avenue of I didn't know, because it never entered into my head, and I saw one of these TV shows that made it look like it was okay. I'll give that a little bit. But someone who's actually good, but expert in the field, somebody's been doing it years and years, yeah, they know. You have to learn about it to get good.
Right.
So
for me, I did that shotgun tour of several national parks, and there's a couple times where I accidentally fell off the actual path and ended up down a game trail. Now, say I'm doing that and I stumble across something more than just an arrowhead, because those are a dime a dozen, but something that looks like a legitimate artifact. I mean, is there a 1-800 number do you call, or do you just go to the nearest ranger station and be like, hey, I found this here, worth checking out?
Yeah. Well, don't take it with you, obviously.
Right.
But what I suggest for people to do is to contact the land agency. If you're in Nevada, which is all Bureau of Land Management, 99.9% of it, if you are out there and you find something, call the nearest office. They'll have a technician or an archaeologist on staff specifically to do that. Take a picture of it, take a GPS point of it, and send it to them and say, hey, this is here. It's worth checking out. And the person in the office will make that decision. And if it's just an arrowhead, it's just an arrowhead. They'll put a pin in it, and they might come back to it. They might not. But I've seen people who have sent in pictures, and it's an arrowhead. It's that long.
It's a little bigger than an arrow.
Holy crap. They send people out, and it's, they're right there. Mm-hmm. Some of these sites where human remains have been discovered, there was, people called the sheriff. I remember there was an incident near Roundup, Montana, on the Mussel Shell. Some fishermen found a couple of bones, including a skull. They called the sheriff. Sheriff come out and took all the bones out of the bank, and all right, took them into the lab, and the teeth didn't match anybody, and it was the mystery woman of the mussel shell, and then anthropologist from the state crime lab came in and did some tinkering and was like, "Where'd you find her?" And they brought him out to the site, and he looked at it, and he took some samples of the dirt, and he measured the stratigraphy. She'd only been there 5,000 years. You know, and it was one of those, you know, the site had been really irreparably damaged because law enforcement didn't know what they were doing. They were excavating a body. But you know, that was one of those instances where somebody found something, called the authorities came, and it eventually got to where it was going, or where it needed to go. But yeah, if you're in the woods and you're hiking and you find something, call the land agency. And if they know about it, all you've done is wasted a couple minutes of time letting them know.
Yeah, no harm, no foul.
That's really not any skin off of anybody's nose to do that. And again, if you're on private land, you know, duck hunting or whatever, clear it with the landowner, because it'd be really unfortunate to find an artifact on private land and keep it, and then the next time you talk to the landowner, he's like, "Oh yeah, you know, there's some stuff coming down from the hill where the old family cemetery is." You know, I mean, did you take great granny's diamond ring home with you? I mean, so, but yeah, the regulations are easy to find. You know, all the state agencies have them, the government agencies have them. Just hop online and see what they are. Some places allow artifact collecting, from what I understand. I more see it with fossils. People ask me about fossil collecting and everything, even though fossils are not my deal. But you know, like in Montana on Bureau of Land Management, I think the Forest Service is the same way. You can pick up 25 pounds of fossils, but they can't have a spine. They can't be vertebrate fossils. Probably something to do with the Tyrannosaur Sioux and that big hubbub where they're like, we don't want to have somebody pick up something, sell it for lots of money. A whole bunch of other people go, "Oh my," and run out there and proceed to destroy everything in some new gold rush to get rich off of fossils or whiskey bottles. You know, people have been sending me the videos of the guy who has the town in Nevada. Oh, he's digging up whiskey bottles. Okay, well, he can. It's his property. I can say that he's destroying an archaeological site, but it's his to destroy. But it's, you know, when people come up to where I work at, you know, when I was working at Garnett Ghost Town, I had people say, "Hey, I watched this guy on YouTube. Can I do this here?" And I'm like, "No, you know, you cannot." And then some of them were like, "Oh, I didn't know." And I point to the sign and I give them a little lecture. And then there's some people that it's like I spit in their Cheerios. And, they're pissed. And it's like, well, what do you want me to do? I don't make the rules. I just stand here and, well, I can't look pretty, so I just stand here. You know what I mean? So yeah, it's definitely.
So I was reading Steve Rinella's American Bison, and he goes in. Have you read that by chance?
No, I haven't.
It's a story about him going on a bison hunt, but he injects a boatload of history around the North American buffalo and all the subspecies and everything and how they blah blah blah. Anyway, the point is, I remember there's a brief part in there where he talks about he came across a buffalo skull, and if it's from this time period to this time period, you're allowed to keep it. But if it's older than that, it's not legal to keep it.
Yeah, well, 50 years old and older,
yeah,
is what's considered historic in the States. It really depends on where you go. You know, where in the world you go. I know, you go to Great Britain, the UK, and 50 years old, unless it's involved in the war, they laugh at you. That's not. I mean, I had a lady up there, and I was very proud of the fact that a couple of our buildings are 132 years old and are still square. You know, you can still live in them. They're great. And she was like, "Oh, I live in a house that was built in 1632," and I'm like, "Oh, go back to England." Yeah, I understand that we can be proud of something that we have here that's not as old as the rest of the world. Now, if I had that same conversation with that same woman, yet we're in the Southwest in the Phoenix Basin at Pueblo Grande, it'd be one of those. Okay, stop being difficult. This is older than your place by 1,000 years.
Right.
You know, which if you ever get down there, I strongly recommend that museum there in Phoenix, Pueblo Grande.
I'm trying to think where we went. So I have family down in Fountain Hills area, and
Okay.
I know we went up to, was it Sedona?
Yeah.
And there's
with the crystals.
Yeah, I think so. And then we went to a couple ghost towns, and we checked out the fossilized dinosaur tracks and Old River Basin and stuff like that.
Near Tuba City. Somebody
Yeah.
asked me about that because apparently there was human footprints there. Oh man.
Not from how many tourists go through there every year, of course.
Oh no, from millions and millions of years ago, proved dinosaurs and humans walk together.
I'm going to go out on a limb and assume you don't subscribe to the world is only 6,000 years theory.
No, I don't. You know, as much as I try to be respectful of anybody's belief system, I don't care if it brings you comfort. Perfect. The moment you start making it everybody else's problem, or everybody else has to suddenly believe what you believe, that's when there's an issue. So I mean, and unfortunately the young earth creationist bunch are the ones that have gotten in my face and screamed at me. I'm like, that's going to get you that far, you know.
It's funny. I got a group of friends. We're kind of a walking bar joke because I'm Christian, but I'm not the, if you don't believe what I believe, then you're wrong type. I'm more of the, you do you and I do me, and we'll sort it out later. But I have friends, you know, an atheist, a heathen, and a Christian walk into a bar.
I've heard that joke.
Yeah.
I am that joke. Yeah, you know, I mean, I've known a lot of people who are very strong in their faith system, regardless of what it is, and I'm like, that's perfect. We're very small, and I don't think we have a single idea what really is going on.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
Why worry about it? You know, I mean, try to be decent to folk and not live a good life. But right. I mean, so yeah,
I'm excited because I got accepted into a Norse/Celtic pagan clan as the token Friar Tuck title. So nice. I'm just going to go there, brew beer, figure out mead, and just have a jolly good time.
What a terrible life, sir.
Right.
Oh. Here's a short period. You better walk off right now. Right. You know, that sounds awesome. That'd be great.
And we
making beer and mead.
Right. I know it's a rough life, but I guess somebody.
There's an archaeology of that.
No kidding.
Archaeology of alcohol. Kid you not.
Yeah. Yeah. Kind of. What brewery did it?
Ninkasi.
No. There's a out of Michigan. Is it?
Oh, nothing.
They do the Two Hearted. No, not Bell's. I can't remember who. Anyway, Sam something is the owner. They just merged with Sam Adams a couple of years ago. I'm drawing a blank now. Anyway, but they did the Ancient Ale series, and they dug up some old Egyptian and Persian and whatever recipes from thousands of years ago and tried to recreate it with modern technology and everything. And it was a mixed bag of results.
Sure. Have you heard of Ninkasi Brewing out of Oregon?
No.
They were a brewery. I can't remember when they started, late 90s, I think. But their first beer was from a recipe written in cuneiform that was found in like the city of in Iraq.
Okay.
And it was like a honey beer or something like that. And the goddess of brewing from the Middle East is Ninkasi, if I'm remembering that right. Watch, I'm completely off wrong. But that's I think where they got their start.
Sure.
And was recreating this old Persian, what we would call beer. They might not have called it that.
Yeah. So it was beer came out of the Middle East, and then up in the northern Europe, so Scandinavian area, was the meads. Yep. If I remember the history right. And,
because the only sugar you could get up there was honey.
Right.
Easily.
There's a brewery here that did it's called the Brack, and it's like a hybrid between mead and beer. I think it's called the Brack. I'm pretty sure. I'm probably butchering that.
Okay.
Somebody's gonna yell at me. But
it's Brack or a lambic?
No, lambic is Belgium.
Okay.
And it has to be called a lambic, or to be classified as a lambic has to come out of the Lambic Valley of Belgium.
Okay.
Similar to tequila comes out of is only made in Mexico.
Sure.
Kind of deal. But anyway, it's like it kind of mid-Europe where this, the people coming out of the spice trade would bring up their mead or ales and such, and people like, oh, we have this mead, try it. And,
there you go.
I'll trade you the yours for mine, and somehow or another, at some point, you got this hybrid, and it was pretty cool to have.
That's cool. Have you ever had that beer that's made in Belgium by the monks, and they only brew like? How's that? Because I've heard about it so many times, and I'm just like,
so it's
I never get a chance.
Shameless plug for another show out of the studio called Homebrew Bound. They're actually doing reading of Brew Like a Monk, and they're talking about the
nice.
What's the style of beer that they do? I'll think of it later. But yeah, there's a few breweries in Belgium and across the United States are this particular type, and they have limited how much they can actually make each year.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't do a lot that gets over to the United States because the people on the secondary market like to jack the price up through the roof. And there's one brewery in particular, they did a 4-bottle set for, I think it was only $50. And they're like, please do not break this up. It's meant to be paired with one another. And of course, people broke it up, and some guy sold one of the bottles for upwards of $9,000. I think Brian said on the show. It's like, this is why
I'll drink water from a hose first. Jesus, $9,000, huh?
But I can get Orval out, so I'm just stone's throw from Minnesota in the Twin Cities, and they have quite a nice beer market, and Orval comes into town every once in a while, and it's nice. I'd like to get over to Belgium sometime, and in particular, I'd like to go to Cantillon. It's 50-year-old brewery still being made the way it was 150 years ago. 6 generations of the same family, and if it's not broke, don't fix it.
Exactly. No, I've actually really curbed my beer consumption. I discovered that I just got to a point where it wasn't agreeing with me.
Mm-hmm.
But I still on occasion partake. In Missoula, where I live, I think there's 16 breweries. It's college town, so that might be why. But like, there's 16 breweries, 2 or 3 cider houses, a couple of wineries, and then 3 or 4 distilleries. We like our our drink here.
If you come to Wisconsin.
I've been to Wisconsin.
We know
Oshkosh.
Yeah. Oh, no kidding.
Yeah. That was the first trip I took east of eastern Montana in my entire life, was Oshkosh. I won an art contest in high school.
No kidding. And
I got to do a 2-week, essentially like aviation summer camp there at Oshkosh, and got to the first week I was learning to fly and classes, and then the second week was the first week of AirVenture. And I think it was 2000. So yeah, that was really cool.
How many, to go off the rails a little bit here, how many cookie jars do you have your hands in? Because husband, father, anthropologist, airplane enthusiast, I saw. Did you get your pilot's license
Yep.
and car enthusiast?
Yep.
And now,
Yeah, I'm a gearhead.
dabble in art a little bit too.
Well, I used
And
to.
Scotch. I almost forgot.
And Scotch. Well, actually, right now it's not Scotch. It's rye whiskey, 10th Mountain,
Sure.
out of Colorado. Disjointed David on TikTok sent me this. Yeah, we were talking. We were sending messages back and forth one day, and I said something like I had like one shot of whiskey left, and he's like, "That's terrible." I'm like, "I know. Tell me about it." and then he sends me a message. He's like, "So I need your real address." I'm like, "Okay." I mean, he's one of the he seems like one of the most mellow, chilled out guys I would ever have the pleasure of meeting. So I'm like, "What's he gonna send me? A box of Tribbles?" Who knows? Who knows? So anyway, this bottle shows up. Oh, amazing. It's pretty damn good. But yeah, I've got a bottle of
Old Faithful for me, Bullet Bourbon. Nothing too crazy.
Okay. Yeah.
It's consistent.
I've got a bottle of Ardbeg in the house, in the cupboard there. And I don't know if you've had that, but
no, so you mentioned that you like peaty Scotch, and
I do.
I do not at all.
Yeah. Ardbeg is, you can taste the bog bodies. I really should make that a shirt. I really should make merch.
Yeah, I was joking with some friends today and on peat, and I said the only thing peat should be used for is heating your house. And he goes, "Well, don't tell the Irish that." I go, just because they're wrong and they happen to use their grain as an insulation source and later on decide to distill it does not mean it makes a good drink.
No, the Scotch are the ones who invented Scotch.
Yes. Yeah, my buddy was a huge fan of Lagavulin.
Yeah, Lagavulin's good. My boss is a Scotch drinker, and we'll do like the end of the year lunches, and she'll either have Ardbeg or Lagavulin as a salute to us for a good season. But yeah, no, I do like Scotch. I like dark beers when I have them. There's a couple, our multitude of breweries. There's a place called Kettle House, and they make one called Cold Smoke, which is a Scotch ale. And the best way to describe it is Guinness Light. It kind of has that weight, but it's not heavy, and that density of flavor, but it's not a meal, it's a beer. As opposed to Guinness, which is a meal or three.
Yeah,
So
I have two speeds. I either go for the old school West Coast where it's just pine sol and paint thinner bitterness, or the
IPA
double ABV stouts and porters, and if it's barrel aged, better for me. Actually, got myself in a little bit of trouble out in Colorado. Walked into the Great Divide at their downtown location. And I go, "Hey, do you do flights?" And she goes, "Perfect. Yeah, what you do?" I'm like, "Good. I'll take all of them." She looks at me like, "Are you nuts?" Because they had a barrel aged menu and then the regular menu. I'm like, "Yeah, I'll take one of everything you have up there." And she's like staring at me trying to compute this. I'm like, "I'm from Wisconsin. This is normal for us."
How quick did you regret that one?
Not until about 3 a.m. when I had to call my friend that was 45 miles away come get me.
Oh, there you go. I hear Colorado does have a really good beer scene.
Yeah, it does. Denver. So we were staying southwest of Denver in a little ski resort town for a wedding, and hit a few breweries there, and then stumbled up into Denver and get out of the car, and there's dispensary, distillery, brewery. What could go wrong?
Where's the cookie store?
Right.
Yeah, that's one of the things Montana, I think, just legalized here.
Yeah, I saw that.
Our governor also is he's one of the Dinosaur Jesus people.
Oh boy.
And yeah, I don't know how far that legalization is going to get with him in the seat. I open the news, I see the news, and then I shut it off because I can't stand the look on the guy's face, let alone hear what he did.
I listen to a
Uh,
podcast on a whitefish, and so I get kind of some of the wave tops of
okay.
your local news. So Cleared Hot
Yeah.
with Andy Stump, if you get a chance to check him out.
Okay. I'll have to write that down. Yeah. Yeah, Whitefish is a cool little town. It's yeah. My grandmother lives up in Kalispell. Actually, most of my dad's side of the family lives up there. So
Yeah, I got a buddy
So,
in
yeah.
Kalispell and might have to stumble out there. I'm planning on going with a few friends, Montana, Colorado, Utah for elk hunts, and I'm just going to go photograph the whole adventure.
really, well, you should let me know when you're out this way
Yeah, absolutely.
because I go out hunt too. I just don't photo them.
Well, to quote my buddy who was a staff sergeant or E5 or E6 in the Marine Corps and the range instructor for his last year in California, after 2 or 3 days of trying to teach me how to shoot accurately, he goes, "You could miss the broadside of a barn if you were standing in it."
There you go.
Oh.
I know some people like that. I got 2 bullet holes in that green Dodge pickup.
Yeah. Well, speaking of cars, I saw, was it yesterday or a couple days ago? You got was it your aunt's car originally that somebody was an idiot and rattle canned?
Oh yeah. I've actually had that car about 2 years now.
But you
It'll
just
be
got it.
2 years.
Did you just get running? Was that why? I saw
No.
the update? Okay.
So so it's been an up and down. That car, the quick and dirty version that I did on TikTok was pretty much the story. My aunt got divorced from her first husband. That was her car. I mean, I'm pretty sure he bought it from the first owner for her. She drove to my grandmother's house and parked it. And she started going to school at the University for Pharmacy in, well, 87. And my grandparents, I guess, helped buy her a little, like a Ford Escort or something. And that car sat in the backyard and never moved. And I remember I was like 10 or 11 and I got shanghaied into climbing around inside and taping up newspaper around the glass to protect the interior in like 93, 90. My grandfather was still alive, so it was before 95. And the car sat there and it was just a big boat car. And as I mean, it was this car and my mother's 1968 D200 Dodge pickup with a wide block 318 and an automatic in the dash were these 2 classic cars that were in my life, and I never paid attention to them because I was an idiot. When I first got my driver's license, it was a 79 Dodge Power Wagon made of rust and dents. It was in terrible condition. My dad bought it for like $200 from a veterinarian over near Drummond, who it was his like go out and euthanize cattle truck. The floors were made out of somebody's hood. It was in bad shape. And he bought it and I got to play with it on my grandfather's ranch for a little bit and the oil line blew and it died. And then my parents helped me buy this 87 Dodge truck that I had. Meanwhile, I didn't pay attention because it was not my style to this beautiful old Dodge pickup or this 2-door V8 muscle car that was sitting at my grandmother's house. And it just never occurred to me. Plus it was a Ford and I didn't like Fords. I had that. I don't want to touch a Ford, even though my dad's owned Fords and he's owned Chevys. No, when I first started paying attention to cars, my dad bought a brand new Dodge, the last of the square bodies, Cummins turbo diesel. So that was like the pinnacle of what I wanted because I wanted to be like my dad.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, that car sat at my grandmother's house and it was just there. And we'd have family things and my grandfather passed away and it was always there. It just was there. And then my grandmother, after years of living by herself, moved to Kalispell because her daughters lived in Kalispell and she wanted to be close to them. So she kept her house in the Rattlesnake and rented it out. And while the people that she was renting it to were the parents of this kid who wanted the car. In a completely different tangent of my life, because I was working at O'Reilly Auto Parts at the time as a parts runner, I meet and become really good friends with this kid named Justin, who's my age, and his dad, who was like a second dad to me, who have this little shop in Missoula. It's not there anymore, but a little mechanic shop. And wouldn't you know it, Justin's best friend from high school is this kid who wants the car. There's the connection there. So at my wedding in 2015, Ryan finally talks to my aunt, like face to face, and they hash out the car. And she says, fine, I'll sell it to you on payments. And when it's paid off, you get the title. Perfect. So Ryan gets the keys. I guess the keys were in it. And he tells me about it. And I say, good, this is your deal. I'm not involved. Your deal. You know, I don't want to hear anything about it. Because again, I just wasn't interested in the car. It's a two-door Ford Galaxy. And I never had this idea in my head that they were cool muscle cars. Anyway, long story short, I get married. I go back down to Arizona for a couple of years. I come back, and my dad asked me, when is Ryan going to pay my aunt for that car? Shoot. So I go, I talk to Ryan. He, of course, says, oh, no, I paid for it. I couldn't get the title from her. So I end up selling it. Great. So I talked to my aunt. My aunt's like, I'd like to get paid for the car. Yeah, he only ever sent me $25. And I thought that he had bought it from her for $1,500, which is a hell of a deal for a two-door muscle car. 1970? Come on. No, $500. And he didn't pay her for it. And I was just like, if I go see this kid, I'm going to strangle him with his own belt. So no. So I decide I want to know what happened to the car. I knew through either Justin or Ryan that someone in Seeley Lake had bought it. So I put up on Craigslist looking for this car in Seeley Lake. And the guy from Clearwater Towing had it. And he's like, I have this car. You better come look at it. Because I don't know if it's your aunt's car. You might want to check. All right, cool. And I drive all the way up there, brought my daughter because she wanted to go on an adventure. So get out of the house, let mom have some quiet time. And we get up there and I walk in. I know the girl who's working the counter. Again, one of these people I knew through Justin and Brett at the auto shop. Talk with her for a minute. Oh yeah, Bob said I could come look at the car. Oh right. She walks me out back and there's the car and it's black. It was red. You open the door. Oh yeah, it was red. But the license plates were still on it. The original 1987 license plates were still on the car. And that's how I knew it was her car. So I called Bob. I said, yeah, it's my aunt's car. How much you want for it? He's like, $1,000. So I drove it on the trailer. He didn't know what was wrong with it, but I drove it on the trailer with barely running. It did not want to run. Carburetor was all jacked up, and I was running it off of gas cans strapped to the grill, just like they do on Roadkill, because Roadkill is just baking a cake on YouTube for car people. If you've ever watched it, it's hilarious. So I get it up on the trailer and I bring it home and I put a gas tank in it because I had a hole in the gas tank. I put a carburetor on it because it needed a carburetor, and the car runs amazing. I did tune up. That was it. And then I've been taking the paint off, the black rattle can paint, and you can tell how much beer this guy was drinking because there's about 7 coats on the front part of the car, and then you get about to the middle of the door and it starts to thin because I was able, from the middle of the door back, I was just able to give it a little douse of brake cleaner and the paint sloughed off. So now I've got this rat rod looking muscle car. And my aunt got me the title, which is in my uncle's name, her ex's name. And he signed it in 2014 to transfer it to her, like officially, you know, whatever, you know, however their relationship after their marriage was, whatever. Not my business. But she sends me the title and he signed it without a notary. So the title's junk. All right, cool. So I get a hold of him And this is first I have to get a hold of my cousin. Hey, can I have your dad's phone number? Because I haven't talked to your dad in 25 years. I mean, I couldn't drive last time I saw Steve, So I get a hold of him. He says, yeah, come on out. 6 months later, I managed to drive 75 miles to go see him. And I get the car, or I get the title, I get him to sign the paperwork. And oh yeah, just let me know when the car's ready. I will come see it. I'm like, cool. And I come home and I go to work for the rest of the week. And wouldn't you know it, that paperwork disappears. So I look all over the house. I actually found the paperwork about a month and a half ago, and I sent it in the moment I found it. $10. Need my replacement title, please. So I still actually, when it shows up, have to drive to Phillipsburg to have them to sign it again. So anyway, the title is still in the wind. The state actually sent me an email saying the title number is not, or the VIN number is not in our system. I'm like, yeah, because the car's been sitting in my grandmother's backyard probably since before the clerk who sent me that email was born. That's whatever. So anyway, the car drives just fine. It still needs some work. I mean, the fluids all need changed other than the oil. It's serviceable enough to drive around my property, so it's not in the way. And now I'm just waiting on the paperwork so I can take it to the transmission shop and have them flush the transmission. But yeah, that's the only thing. I put tires on it. My mechanic and my tattoo artist came over. My tattoo artist has a 63 Galaxy. So he's all about this car. He's like, I want to know all. Yeah, let's do. Yeah, this would be cool. And yeah, it fires up better than my Toyota. Toyota cranks over 2 or 3 times. That car, pump the gas twice, boom. It's like, and then when I was talking to my Uncle Steve about the car, when I got the paperwork from him, he's like, oh yeah, in like 1984, I think I put like $2,800 in that motor. I'm like, doing what? $2,800 in 1984 is like 3 months worth of work.
Right.
I don't remember. I tell you, it'll burn the back tires right off that car. So it's, but yeah, no, I'm a bit of a gearhead. I try doing art.
I'm not a gearhead, but I understand enough that I know what I'm not doing. But thankfully, I have friends that are like a buddy of mine. He's a certified mechanic, and I'll pitch ideas off him every once in a while. Just halfway through a bottle of bourbon, like, hey, remember when I had a Geo Tracker and we put $1,800 off-road tires on a $250 car? What if I bought another one and took my 7.5 V8 out of my 250 and put that into a tracker? What, could I do that? It's like, first thing I get back at, why?
Because
yeah. Because I found a company that makes track kits for geo trackers, and I could register it as a UTV in my county.
Yeah. Yeah, that's another one of those things where, like, I've got friends who buy those UTVs. Oh, I spent $27,000 on this. Why don't you buy a mid-90s Jeep?
Right.
Take the doors off. Well, nothing. The Jeep's got a heater.
Right. Yeah, my dad's leverage to not allow me to put him into a nursing home one day is a 76 Gran Torino Elite, which they only made 74, 76, and he's held on to it all these years. And
nice.
The title is in the safe that I'm pretty sure an 18-pound cannonball wouldn't break open, and he won't give me the combination until he's on his deathbed. So,
well, make sure you get it.
I've
got a funny story about it. Yeah, it sounds like it. I've got a funny story about a cannonball too.
Yeah. We should get back on archaeology.
Provenance. So Provenance.
Yes, Provenance versus Providence, if I'm saying that right.
Providence, yeah. So anyway, I'll tell the story and then I'll get into that. So when I was doing my undergrad, I'm down in the lab, right? And one of the things that we had to deal with was donated artifacts. And it was in a box, and it had a card with it. This little cardboard box. Inside is a 6-pound fused cannonball. And nobody knew what it was. It's a cannonball. And you take the card out and you look at the card, and on the card it's written in very beautiful cursive that's barely legible, but on the other side it was actually printed. And this cannonball had been excavated, apparently had been found while digging a ditch from a well at Gettysburg in 1893. And the person who found it kept it and moved out to Montana for whatever their reason, and donated it, or their family donated it, in 1921 to the University of Montana. And here it is, this cannonball. It's been sitting on however many professors' desks. It's been stuffed in cupboards, all of this stuff. And it's cannonball, right? Okay, it's cannonball. Well, nobody at the time in the lab knew anything about munitions until I walked in. So I'm sitting at the desk and I've got the cannonball, I'm spinning it, and I stop and I look, and there's lettering on this. And I write the lettering down, and I was like, you realize that this is a fused cannonball, right? What's that mean? It's explosive. Shit, SWAT showed up. you know, it went to the police department. The police department took it out to the landfill and cracked it open with a bit of plastic explosive, and then brought it back to us in a bag. And it fits all together. But it was grape shot. It was an explosive fused cannonball, and the lettering on the bottom of the fuse that I was able to find tracked it to Great Britain. And it was one of these 6-pounder cannon shot that would launch, and the fuse would be on fire. And when that fuse burned through wherever it was in flight, it would blow up. And you'd have the casing itself would be damaging, but inside it was all 32 buckshot. Pretty serious.
Yeah, no, that.
And apparently, and I found out some information on it. I read up on it. Apparently, the British sent a bunch of these cannonballs to the Confederacy via blockade runners, because none of them worked. They all were duds. I mean, you could shoot them out of a cannon, and if they hit somebody, it would end their day quite badly, but they were never going to explode. They had all been contaminated at the factory or something like that. They were all wet, and it just did. So it was a big deal. And then, of course, I showed all that documentation to Bethany, who was running the lab at the time. She looks at me and she's like, you could have just brought me this before the cops showed up. I was like, But yeah, no, that cannonball was something else. But yeah, Provenance versus Providence. This is
a hot topic debate. It seems to be on the old TikTok.
Ooh, man. So Provenance comes from the word provenance. So provenance is a French word, and it comes from Latin, and it's essentially the origin of, or where from. So the provenance of that car, your dad's, is Detroit, on this date, and it left the factory, it went to the dealership, and then your dad bought it. That's the provenance of that car. The provenience of that car is that it's at your dad's house. It's parked in the garage, on the left side of the garage, covered in about 3 years of newspaper and an old army tarp.
You're actually not too far off.
Exactly, right? But the provenience is, 100 years from now, 1,000 years from now, if that car was still there, they would be able to tell the absolute age of that car because of all of the data around it. That's the provenience. So the actual position in which an artifact is found. So when I say provenience, and I'm talking about a specific artifact, I'm talking about, the depth in the ground. What was it found with? What, all of that obnoxious archaeological stuff that we record all the time when we find something. The provenance of it is, where did it originate? And if you look at the definition on the internet, they use a coin as an example. The provenance of that Roman coin is a mint in outside of Rome, and it would have been packed on a horse over the Alps to the Rhine to a forward Roman army base, where it would have then been one of 1,000 coins handed out to this regiment of centurions, who then would have gone into the town and spent it. And then that coin would have wound up in the pocket of a merchant who was going back to Spain, because that's where good wine is, to buy more wine. And then it would get on a boat somehow and the boat would sink. So the provenance of that is where it started and where it traveled until it got to the shipwreck. And then the shipwreck is the Provenance. It's from a shipwreck that dates to this time period, which proves that it is a real legitimate artifact. So that's what I mean by provenance and Provenance.
Why do people get so bent out of shape over that then?
Because Provenance is is a very specific word. Like provenance seems to be used rather regularly. I use the two interchangeably. When I think of the word, I go, oh, it's just a word. But there's a creator on here who does interesting history facts. He wears the pork pie hat and the plaid. I can't remember his handle at the moment, but he's a curator at a museum, and he's like, we use provenance in respect to curation of artifacts. Exactly. Like I said before, if you have an artifact that's out on an exhibit, all that paperwork is the provenance of that artifact, so the artifact can come back to the repository. The provenience is where it came from, out in the field, wherever. I've seen it used in archaeology. Apparently forestry utilizes it for seeding. The provenience of certain seeds allows you to track the genetic makeup of that particular tree or that genetic combination. So you actually have a viable grove that starts growing with enough genetic diversity to survive, kind of thing. And then the provenience of evidence at a crime scene. Was the gun under his hand? Was the gun underneath the table? I mean, that kind of detail and information that you need. But I think because it's kind of a very specific word, people will hear it and go, oh, he's saying this word that I am familiar with. Wrong. People will also say that I'm using Providence wrong. And I'm like, we're not talking about a town in Rhode Island. There's nothing Jesus-y about this particular pair of shoes we found in the bog. I mean, so, but it's just a word that is not in common use, and and this goes for everybody, and I've been guilty doing this too. When you hear something you're not familiar with, 9 times out of 10 you're just going to go, oh, I don't think that's right, or this person's wrong based on my experience. And all it would take is a quick Google search. All it would take is a look at a dictionary.
Right.
And that is what it is. I'm not going to fault anybody. But I've done some really nice ones, and I've done some kind of sarcastic ones, and then I've done, I think the one I did with all the examples was actually quite nice. But
I thoroughly enjoy it too, because I've just given up with arguments on the internet. Some of the best advice I was ever given was never argue with a drunk or a fool. Both will beat you with experience, and given enough time, both will drag you down to their level. So,
yeah.
And back in college, I was a history teaching major, and then threw poli-sci in there too, because I was an idiot. And I was that guy on Facebook spouting out, here's everything wrong with the world and here's how to fix blah blah blah, and then eventually decided to calm down a little bit. And now it's just, if I didn't have this podcast, I wouldn't be on social media at all. But
yeah,
such is life. But
yeah, social media is kind of a double-edged sword.
And that's why I got on TikTok in the first place. I'm like, oh, here's a app that's blowing up. Here's a chance to promote the podcast. And
there you go.
Despite 20 years of talking to people for a living, and that's what I do now for anywhere from 40 to 80 hours a week, and then I do the podcast, you'd think I'd be comfortable talking into a camera.
I don't know if that ever changes. Right. What's kind of funny is that, I mean, this is, I was pacing for about 4 hours before I got on here.
Oh, I'm right there with you.
Oh shit, what did I say? What did I say? And now I just thought about it. Oh, I've just cussed a little bit. Listen to your podcast with Josh. Oh, we don't like cussing on the podcast. I'm like, so, but like, it's something that I didn't expect would take off. Me, like pretty much every other person during pandemic, I was bored. One of your questions on here is, how did COVID affect my job?
Yeah.
Other than scheduling, it really didn't. But because the agency I work for only has like 16 field vehicles, and we were not allowed to have more than one person per field vehicle, and there's like 14 foresters, we couldn't go out in the field at the same time. So my week was Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, 4/10s. And even if I was hanging out with people during COVID, everybody I'm friends with, that's when they're off.
Mm-hmm.
So I wasn't seeing anybody. But yeah, so I was bored, nobody's out and about during the days I'm off work. And I tried to go out and go fishing. And I've never seen that many people in my life in this state. We were packed the moment the borders opened on like June 1st or whatever it was last year. Every single person that could rent an RV, a van, or a little car they could stretch out in was here exploring, which is fine, except for the fact that so many fires were started. I put out 132 fires.
No kidding.
People just leaving their campsites. Oh, I'm just going to leave. It's in the stone ring. It's not going to go anywhere. Like, you don't know how
wind's not a
fireworks. But I just didn't go out. So I had projects around the house. And then when I wasn't doing projects around the house, I decided, I spent more time on my phone. Like, I actually started playing games on my tablet, something I don't do, video games. But then I downloaded TikTok. Yeah, why not? Right. And I think I downloaded it like the fall of 2019 because I saw something that was like, oh, maybe I should download it. And I didn't do anything with it, and I was never going to post anything. And then I saw what people were posting, and I was like, I've got a couple of stupid little videos I can put up. The very first one I did is like is a city of Idaho Falls truck driving down the road, and it's got a pile of sand in the back, and the sand is just running out of the cracks in the bed. And it's one of those, he's going to get where he's going. He's going to look back, and there's going to be no sand. So I was like, oh, this is like the days of our lives. And you can hear the guy you can hear my buddy that I was working with and driving, he starts laughing. And that was the first video I did. Oh, nothing's going to happen. And then here we are now. And I'm like, well, I don't know what the hell's going on. Right. I'm approaching 300,000 followers. Unlike, and there's people that I follow and people that I've become friends with through the app who have like 1,000 followers, and they have merch, and they have all of this stuff, and I'm at 300,000 followers, and I'm like, what do I do? I have no idea.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, it's
well, it's a weird time to be, because we're really at the the internet's now kind of, I'd say it's still in its teenage years at best, if you're to put into human terms. It's
maybe
it's like at that 13-year-old where you think you're adult but you're really not. But as far as like,
isn't that politics?
Well, that too. I'd still put that at the terrible threes.
Oh, sure, yeah.
But you have these people that have this huge following, and people are like, oh, you should make a shirt, you should do this, and it's like, okay, how do I do that? And I'm in the same boat with the podcast of trying to figure out the merch game and what do people
you got a shirt on?
Like. Yeah. This was a demo shirt I did years ago. The back says "No Bad Days," which I actually picked up from a customer of mine who just happened to walk in my store, and the usual, hey, how's it going today? Blah blah blah. Let me sell you something. And he goes, I've never had a bad day. Some are better than others. And that was
That's
7
pretty
years.
wise right there.
Yeah, 7 years ago or something like that. And for whatever reason, it just stuck with me. Fast forward a few years later, I have this half-assed idea of starting a company and not sure how to do it, and eventually land on podcast. And my buddy's like, "Hey, you should do merch again." I'm like, "Well, okay." And like logo,
Yeah.
obviously, it's shameless self-promotion. What do I put on the back? I want something on the back. I just don't want this dead negative space. And then that clicked in my head. And it was a
There you
little
go.
wordy to say that whole thing. And so my buddy, who's more creative than I am or could ever hope to be, just sent me a template of no bad days. Like, I like that. And we ran
There you
with
go.
it.
That works. See, you're a step ahead of me because people are like, "Oh, you should make merch." I'm like, "Of what?"
Well,
You
I
know,
think you-
provenience. You know, people are like,
yes.
make a shirt saying provenience, and I'm like, I suppose, or cite your sources.
Yeah.
You know, that seems to be a thing that I do that the ancient aliens people don't.
That's another question I had.
Yeah,
Shows like Ancient Aliens or Oak Island, stuff like that. Does it hurt your field in the public eye? The legitimacy of it?
extremely. You know, as I'm sure you can see through some of the comments that I respond to, there's two type of people that I end up responding to who are being snide. And obviously some of them are just that the only reason they exist is to get a rise out of others, and they, you know, I have stimulated some sort of joy for them by responding. Great. I made somebody's day. Okay.
60 seconds of fame.
Yeah, but then there's people who are genuinely, this is true, and you're lying to me. You know, the angry Marine guy. I don't know if you saw that one. Oh my God. Every single one of his videos, he's raging at archaeologists. I'm sitting there like, well, this guy obviously, somebody must have stepped on his dog's tail or something. I mean, he's just angry. But everything he's saying is just right up there with the rest of the pseudoscience-y stuff. And the moment you say, hey, the evidence doesn't point to that, you're wrong. You're lying.
I read it on Wikipedia, so it must be true.
Well, you know, I read stuff on Wikipedia too all the time. And you know what Wikipedia does? Wikipedia cites its sources. You know? I mean, I had a professor, and apparently everybody's had this professor who says, don't you dare use Wikipedia in your paper. You can, however, use Wikipedia to find sources for your paper. That's brilliant, you know, because I've done that. I've been like, oh, look up something. First thing comes up, Wikipedia. Scroll all the way to the bottom. References. Where did they pull their information? Well, this one might not work. This one, oh, but look at these three that are from this guy who's an absolute expert in the field and has published many, many, many other papers. You know, if you know the guy's name, well, now there's your avenue to chase more documentation, and you learned it through Wikipedia. But yeah, those TV shows, and like I said with like the Indiana Jones movies, there's people that are unable apparently to make the distinction. You know, I don't know why they want to believe ancient aliens. I find something disconcerting about believing that hair, which continues to get crazier and crazier.
Yeah.
And it's a gimmick. It's obviously a gimmick. Why are you believing the gimmick?
And for me, well, I've been a history nerd as long as I could remember. You know, as a little kid, you could point to the spine fossil of a dinosaur, and I could tell you what it came off of. Long gone now. But by middle school and high school, went headfirst into World War II history. And now it's this history as a whole, and I can't get my hands down on enough books about random subjects, and which is why Wikipedia is dangerous for me. I'll go through the sources and start whatever rabbit hole.
Oh yeah, there's a rabbit hole, and then there's the rabbit hole.
Right? But watch it. I've watched one episode of Ancient Aliens, and the takeaway I got was they had their answer, and it was whatever site, what's the Inca site that's real famous?
Nazca.
Yes, thank you.
Nazca, yeah.
Was built by aliens. This is our answer. Now, how do we find the evidence to prove that, quote unquote?
Yeah.
It's like, that's not how this works. That's not how any of this works.
No. You know what's funny, and I mean, I'm getting asked about it. Since that unicorn video that I debunked, which got me famous, let's give that video its credence. You know, since then I've been getting tagged about a dozen times a day. Hey, what do you think about this? Or just tag me in the video, and I can see the first page of it now. It's already that skinny kid with the Coke bottle glasses talking about the Sphinx, or it's what's his face, Joe with the cheese hat, or any of these other conspiracy theory pages that at this point, I think half of them are in it just for views, because it's obviously getting views.
Yeah, that's the one making the rounds right now. The Egyptians built the temple in the Grand Canyon or something to that effect.
Didn't I do a 9-part series on that?
Yes. And I was laughing the whole damn time.
Oh man. But where was I going with that? Sorry, I had a train and then I lost it.
Sorry, I wrecked that.
No,
unicorn.
but like, yeah. So the moment that unicorn video went wild, and I suddenly started getting all these people, and then the Göbekli Tepe one, where I debunked the girl. Oh, people got bent the hell out of shape about that, because she's a very pretty white girl. Oh, how dare I tell her she's wrong? I'm like, I don't care what your gender or color or anything it is. If you're saying something stupid and it's something I care about, like my career, I might say something. So, but I see these things, and I'll look at where they're coming from, and it's Ancient Aliens. Or even more ridiculous, it's coming from science fiction from the 20s, like the Anunnaki, or however you pronounce it, which Ancient Aliens has just jumped right on, because oh my. Well, the Anunnaki are Egyptian. No, they're not. They're Persian. They're Babylonian. But the point is that they come from a translation of Babylonian artifacts in cuneiform that went through, what was it? Babylonian to Egyptian to Greek to Latin to French to German to English in translation. How much has been lost in that translation?
Yeah.
Well, you know who grabbed a hold of that and ran with it? H.P. Lovecraft. The Ancient Aliens theory, or the Ancient Aliens trope, is not new. It's from H.P. Lovecraft and the other guy, Wells. Who's the other guy? H.P. Lovecraft, and there's Robert, the other sci-fi pulp fiction writer from the 30s. He died early. He died before Lovecraft. I want to say Howard. Rob Howard. Yes. I think.
That sounds.
He created Conan. I think he's the guy that wrote Conan the Barbarian. Yeah, if you got the internet in front of you real quick.
Perks of having 3 monitors.
I've only got 2. What's funny is that I also started playing Dungeons and Dragons for the first time ever. Because I have friends on TikTok who are like, we're total D&D nerds, you're going to play with us. I've advanced more in technology in the last month than I have in the last 25 years. I've got a webcam and 2 monitors. Instead of squinting at my laptop.
Howard wrote Conan the Adventure in 1966.
No. Oh. Not him. So I'm thinking of there was another writer in the early to mid 30s, at the same time as H.P. Lovecraft, and they actually talked or they actually had correspondence back and forth. But they were the same, published in the back of boys' magazines, science fiction, weird tales kind of stuff. And all of those ancient alien tropes, like the pyramids in Antarctica, that's from the Mountains of Madness, or In the Mountains of Madness from H.P. Lovecraft. Well, that appears in a book in like the 50s or early 60s written by a Frenchman whose name I cannot remember. Well, then that same trope appears almost to the letter in a book by some guy named Eric von Daniken, Ancient Aliens. And it was so obvious that he ripped off this French guy that he was faced with a lawsuit by the estate of this author, this French author. And the way he got out of it was citing him, was giving him credit. He didn't go to court to fight it. He cited the guy because, oh crap, I got caught. But you know, it's one of those things where you have these shows, and like everybody's been telling me about Graham Hancock. He was on Joe Rogan.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Congratulations. What does that have to do with my field and the fact that I've been studying this in an academic setting for over 15 years and I've been working in it for 10? What does that have to do with, oh, well, he knows more about your job? No, we don't. No, we don't. You know,
just because
like
you have a megaphone doesn't mean you're right.
Exactly. But you know, there'll be people that watch these shows and they'll take it as gospel truth. And then they'll tell me that I'm wrong. And I'm not saying that they're wrong. Just like every other archaeologist out there, we're saying that there's no evidence for it. There's a hell of a difference there. Oh no. You obviously don't know what you're looking at. And that gets us back to the do you want the electrician taking out your appendix or the doctor? You know, right. Who are you going to believe? The Göbekli Tepe one is a great example because I answered a question about it that people asked how old it was, or the person asked is like, I find it hard to believe that it was being constructed before man developed agriculture and cities. I said, well, it wasn't, but it was started, and there is a difference. And I pointed out that, you know, this site, which has been buried, well, parts of it have been filled in to be built on, which is what we do every time we demo a building. We fill that hole in. What do we fill it in with? Oh, more dirt or parts of the old building. You know, the developments, the modification of things.
Is it a city in France or ancient in Greece? I can't remember now, but there's like a city on top of what is there today, or below, excuse me. They just built right over the top. Obviously, it's not the whole buildings anymore, but I mean, you can walk through like it's a catacomb.
Yeah, every major city on the planet. Seattle has that. New York has that. You know, you can see where they built land in New York. When they were cleaning up the Twin Towers, they found the remains of the ships that had been filled with rock and sunk to create land to build in the marsh.
Okay.
Which is where the Twin Towers are.
Mm-hmm.
The whole inner side of the harbor there in San Francisco is built on sunken ships and fill. It's not real land. You go to Paris has the catacombs. So does Rome. So does London. Edinburgh, there's parts of Edinburgh that they just went right over the top of because of the plague. They buried parts of the town. Every place where you have huge amounts of human population just gets buried and filled in and buried and filled in, and you know, as the needs of the population changes. You know, Missoula is a great example of that. Indigenous archaeology in Montana is pretty thin, not because they haven't been here long. It's because there's not a lot of sedentary mass building. There's not any real agriculture. There's nothing that creates a lot of deposition of artifacts. It's all within the first foot. Well, Missoula is built on the confluence of 5 valleys two of which are major rivers. It's an absolutely beautiful spot. It's perfect for grazing animals because there's enough flat land before you get to the mountains. And it's kind of in a weather donut hole. Bad weather goes to the south, bad weather goes to the north, and what you get here in the basin is pretty mild. What did European Americans do when they got here? Well, they built on top of it. What did the indigenous peoples for thousands of years do? At certain parts of the year, there were teepee villages from one end of the basin to the other because it's a good spot for habitation built on top of it. And as the needs change, the old buildings come down and they fill them in and the new buildings get built on top. Göbekli Tepe was a site used by humans for 2,000 years. And when people say, "Oh, look at this," it shows that a meteor killed all the people from Atlantis. When was that block put up? Did you bother looking at any of the paperwork? Did you bother looking at any of the site forms? When did that monument get posted? Because you can see it in the deposition of the site. No, they don't look at that. Oh no, it shows a comet. It's obviously a comet has hit the Earth. Does it show it hitting the Earth? It could just be the observation of a comet. So when someone like me says, why did the comet have to hit the Earth? Maybe it's just an observation of a celestial event. There's a battle between the Medes and the Lydians. And I can't remember the name of the river, but there was a date associated with it down to the day because a lunar eclipse happened, shut the light off from the battlefield, and everybody stopped fighting because holy shit, the gods must be pissed. And it got recorded extensively. Well, the world didn't end. The light just flickered a moment. And it made such an impression that they recorded it. How come this comet at Göbekli Tepe had to hit the planet? Maybe it was just bright enough like Halley's Comet or one of these other celestial motions that we see.
What's the one that exploded over Russia before it actually hit the surface, but it leveled a shitload of forestry?
That was I think that was the Tunguska event.
Yeah.
That was a meteor.
Yeah. I mean, so could it be something like that where
it could have been
hit the ground, but there's enough force behind it
there's enough force of it to ruin somebody's day and create some sort of local lore. But that's the locals saying, hey, the day all the trees fell down and it killed half of our people is a long, far away cry from the world got a hard reset all over the planet with no evidence. And that's what you see some of these theories trying to do. When people say, "Oh, Graham Hancock has this theory about the mother culture," and I say, "Well, that's a load of crap." They go, "Well, you don't know what you're talking about."
Made from gold by an alien race to mine more gold.
Well, if we were, you know what that means? There should be no problems between any people of whatever affiliation, color, shape, size, gender, whatever, because we're all the goddamn same. But when you say, "Oh, hey, there's no evidence of that," and they go, "Well, how do you know?" Well, the archaeological record kind of does this. It goes up and it progresses. And yeah, there's little ups and downs, and there's some drops and there's some ups but generally across, let's call it 100,000 years of human intelligence, where we're actually utilizing distinctive stone tools. We have stone tools dating back 3 million years, where somebody picked up a rock and figured, oh, if I break this rock a certain way, I can cut a food. I can cut somebody. There's a progression as it goes up, and it's almost completely unbroken. Like, you don't see this, everything is stopped, like a massive event that killed everybody. There's no dead zone there. There's, people leave an area, but everywhere else around that area still has artifacts, still has life progressing. There's nothing that stands out in respect to development. There's a couple little hiccups like the Antikythera mechanism, which was found on a shipwreck 2,000 years ago. It looks like a piece of a time machine. Well, they found out that it's just essentially a seagoing calculator, an orrery. It tabulates I think it was meant to count, to measure tides or moon cycles or something. It'd be very difficult to create back then, which is probably why we've only ever found one.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not impossible. And again, with we've only found one, so it's obviously got to be one. No, how about the one guy that made them, and the one guy that had the skill to make them, never passed that on to his apprentice or his son or whatever. So the 50 that got made were the 50 that were it. And one has survived. That's pretty good odds, over 2,000 years.
Right. And
there's nothing that says, oh, hey, there's this one distinctive cultural binder artifact that covers the entire world that shows, yes, we all come from the same spot and we are all the same culture. There's no structures. Göbekli Tepe is the only thing that survived across the planet. Really? The only thing. We're finding 3 million year old stone tools. Don't you think they would have been washed away too? All the stone tools that come prior to that, Göbekli Tepe, all the stone tools that are at Göbekli Tepe, they are pretty linear. They don't seem to have a big interruption. Göbekli Tepe doesn't just appear. It was built up and then it was abandoned because it no longer served the purpose of the people and fell into disarray and ruin. Detroit.
Mm-hmm.
Detroit's doing the same thing. The only difference is that we know what Detroit is. But 1,000 years from now, people, future archaeologists will look at Detroit and go, what was this place? And they'll make all of their own crazy assumptions as well. Because I'm not going to say that we're absolutely right about everything. There's jokes about how if we don't know what it is, we call it ritual. Oh, what is it? Oh, I don't know. Oh, it was obviously ritual.
Yeah, I remember
somebody called. Go
Go
ahead.
ahead.
I was going to say somebody. I saw somewhere. I don't know how true this was because I never bothered to really look it up. But somebody found a particularly male-shaped rock. Well, what do you think it is? But nobody wanted to say what they thought it was.
Right.
So it was ritual. This cup is ritual. I do an act every morning. I put life-giving beverage in it, and
Right. The magic bean juice.
The magic bean juice. That's a ritual.
Mm-hmm.
So coffee cup is a ritual. But yeah, those TV shows and it further removes what I actually do versus what they see on TV. Because when people find out that I'm an archaeologist, they either go, oh, like Ancient Aliens, oh, like Indiana Jones, or, and this is my favorite, I love dinosaurs. That's something a 6-year-old can say. I love dinosaurs. I'm like, yes, you do, kid. So do I. You're not gonna tell a 6-year-old that your dreams are wrong.
Right.
But you would think, and explaining it to somebody, archaeology is part of anthropology, which is the study of people. Anthro, where dinosaurs fit in.
What is
They
that?
don't.
Paleontology.
That's paleontology.
Yeah.
And that's
So
and I want to be a
archaeology is just this
paleontologist.
umbrella field, and then you have paleontology, anthropology, Egyptology, yada 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 throughout there.
No.
Okay.
So anthropology is the umbrella.
Okay.
And this is only in the States. So in the States, if you go into archaeology, you look at my degree. My degree says Bachelor of Arts, Anthropology. Archaeology is my focus. Archaeology is what I aimed for. There's archaeology, bioanthropology, which is the study of the meat and the bones. There's cultural anthropology, which is everything from why do we cheer on football, to religion, to tattoos, to gatherings. I mean, to the culture. And then there's linguistics, which is the vocalization and this form of communication, which is not unique to humans. Animals make noise to talk as well, but ours is our linguistical background, dare I say, seems to be suitably complicated, suitably complex for what we're putting forth. Paleontology is more of like wildlife biology in my mind. I don't even know what it falls under, but it's considered a science versus anthropology, which is considered a humanity, even though you can still do scientific things within archaeology. If you were to go to Europe, archaeology is its own field. Sure. You get a degree in archaeology, and they don't combine them. You can focus on one thing. When I was doing my undergrad, I had to take linguistics. I had to take an osteology class for my bioanthropology requirement. I had to take cultural anthropology, which was one of half a dozen classes, of which I don't think really any of them were really that good for what I was going to be doing. They seemed to be, well, I mean, the one was more of a history class. I mean, it was part of the curriculum because I think it needed a spot. It was kind of lonely. It was the only Persian history class in the entire school. It was like, okay, well, I mean, there's an archaeological background there pretty extensively, so sure, stick it as a requirement there.
I need to pick your brain about that after we go off air, because I've been looking I've been looking for a reputable book on the history of Persia in particular. Podcast sent me down a rabbit hole of stuff, but we can get in that later.
Oh, sure. But yeah,
so how did Egyptology become its own field? Is it just because there's so much history there?
Exactly.
Okay.
You could go to Egypt and you could never leave. You could work on specifically Egyptian stuff for your entire career, your entire life, and your children's children would still be doing the work you're doing.
Which it seems to be that the case. I was just watching
in some cases.
What was it? They found a burial site of a pharaoh or someone in the in the royal family, if you will. I think it's on Netflix. I'll have to look it up later. But but some of the guys that were working there, like, yep, I'm third generation, albeit just lowly employee who is digging sand. But I mean, 3 generations of people working in the same region on this project, and here they are now. It took 3 generations just to go, hey, we now have a name, and we know his mother, and we think we know the father and the uncle, and blah blah blah. And I'm fascinated by that kind of stuff. I'm a real riot at parties, let me tell you.
Fit right in at the parties I go to.
Right.
There's Egyptology is its own, has its own methodology, and I mean, any archaeologist can be an Egyptologist. An Egyptologist can't necessarily be an archaeologist anywhere else because they're so focused on what they're working on. You'd be hard pressed to take an Egyptologist out of Egypt and send him to the American Southwest and say, tell me about the Anasazi. He can blink at you. But you could take me, an archaeologist who's done work in the Southwest, and my bag is historic archaeology, Victorian and Georgian era mining in the frontier West, and aviation. That's like my bag and what I'm really, really good at. You can send me to Egypt though, and I can give you a decent idea, and I can walk myself through it without having my hand held. So, but yeah, Egyptology is so very specific. And then the guys who are doing the grunt work for the archaeologists, one, they don't get enough credit, not the slightest, because they're doing all the grunt work. But in that situation, it's a good job. So the father has it, or the grandfather has it, and brings his son in, who then brings his son in, because it's a continual good thing. But But yeah, I know which one you're talking about. Of course, I can't remember which one he is. But
speaking of Egyptology, I know it's not your field, but many months ago, I shot you a question. You actually responded to it, and it was something along the lines of the theory that there was a civilization that predates the Egyptian civilization. You gave it a thought out answer, and what I was trying to remember at the time, and it was just blowing. I couldn't think of it, but also it's hard to fit a well thought out question in 100 characters, 140 characters that you get.
Yeah.
Comment. Robert Schoch.
Mm-hmm.
I heard him on another
the water
podcast.
theory.
Not the water theory necessarily, but that the Sphinx is 10,000 years older than what is accepted today, and I guess he wrote a book on it. I haven't read the book yet, but he theorized that the Sahara Desert at one point was a nice either tropical or subtropical forest, and then something wiped it out. And so he called up some people at the North Pole that were doing some ice samples and said, hey, do you by chance have evidence around this time period of a massive solar flare? And they said, yes, blah, blah. And so his running theory was there's a thriving civilization, and within somewhere between a week and a month, solar flare hits and this completely hits the reset button on them. And that's what I was trying. And for me, I'm just listening to a podcast. I know nothing about it. Like, well, it seems more credible than Oak Island or Ancient Aliens or Graham Hancock, because he's saying, here's the evidence I have. I'm not saying, yes, this is truth. I'm saying, this could be an idea. Let's explore it. But seem to be ostracized by the Egyptology field and community because of that. I'm just curious your thoughts on that.
Well, the problem with that I see with it, when he says, I have this idea that there was a civilization that was advanced enough and had the resources and infrastructure enough to build something like the Sphinx. Within a week to a month, hard reset. Where's the pieces?
Right.
That would be my response. Where's the infrastructure? Where is the buildings? A hard reset like that is almost the best case scenario for archaeology, because it locks everything in time. Some of the best sites, Pompeii happened in a day. And we are finding, they just found a chariot at Pompeii, one of like 3 ever found. Wood, tin, bronze, the whole shooting match. The horses with the tack are still in the barn. So quick. That's like perfect for preserving things. My question would be, where is it? And I know the Sahara is covered in sand and pretty deep, but we're not the only ones with eyes to recognize its antiquity. Remember what I said about the first archaeologist. The first archaeologist, Nabonidus II, the first recorded one, is 3,000 years ago, and he's out looking. Now, he might be looking in some fashion to say, well, not only am I king, this ancient stuff proves that my lineage makes me king. The inscription that's at the Sphinx, the dream stele, where that pharaoh Tutmos says, I had a dream that the Sphinx told me to dig him out. And they attribute it to the pharaoh, Khufu or Khufu. I always pronounce his name wrong.
I think it's Khufu.
Corfu or something like that. Yeah. But they attribute this thing to something that's 1,000 years old or 1,500 years old at the time of Tutmos. So it's ancient history to them. They attribute it to them, or they say this thing told me to let him out. People were paying attention. So back then, finding a whole civilization, there would have been record of it. There would have been stories of it. And as much as people want Atlantis to be real, you know, the person that Atlantis comes from is Plato. You know, Plato describes Atlantis. And at the, you know, I think it was maybe 20 years before Plato creates Atlantis, Mount Thera explodes and sinks the city of sinks the island of Santorini and the city of crap. Of course, I can't remember it.
I know the wave tops of the story, but
yeah, I mean the city there on Santorini. It was in the perfect spot to be sunk when a volcano erupted, and you know the waves come up, the tsunami from the eruption sinks it. The ground liquefies and it's swallowed by the earth. There's fire and raining doom, and everything about the Atlantis myth is Santorini. And then the Minoan civilization, which was very advanced for the time period, Minoans had plumbing inside the house. You know, all of their cities are on the coast. What's the first thing it gets hit by a tsunami from a volcano? Their cities. So they didn't get destroyed, but it certainly crippled their place on the world stage. And then you have this description of a civilization, which you could attribute to Akhetiri, the city of Akhetiri on Santorini is the city.
I remember what years and years ago. I remember watching a documentary, and they're like, we're gonna find Atlantis, but not like the story version. Like, we believe it was a city. We believe it was attributed to flooding or something of this case. Blah blah. And I can't remember if they attribute to Akhetiri or not, but it was a city on or near the coast, and they even found a roadway via old written descriptions. And sure enough, via satellite imaging, and I think they used the was it LiDAR, light imaging, blah blah.
Yep.
They were able to map where this road was, and there's a breakoff point that goes farther out, and they start, oh, where's that go? And they start finding hand carved stone, and like, oh shit, I think we found something.
Yeah, I think that's Akhetiri.
Okay,
because there's roads on the island that go into the ocean.
Yeah, that very well could be them.
But you know, there's cities falling into the ocean is not new. No. Alexandria fell in the ocean. Port Royal, that's recent. Port Royal is recent, but you give it another 500 years or 1,000 years, and it becomes a story. It becomes, you know, the details get lost as it's going through. But a city that, or a civilization that built the Sphinx, they only built one. You would think they would build more. I mean, the Egyptians built how many pyramids?
Right.
And I know their civilization lasted thousands and thousands of years, but the Sphinx was not a thing that got built overnight. And if they had the,
go ahead, sorry.
If they had the technology to build one, why not build more? And why is that technological prowess not exhibited within their city, within their infrastructure? Where's the roads? Where's the water systems? Where's the agriculture? You know, the fact that, you know, even and say it is buried under the sands of the Sahara. What about the ancient artifacts that would have been found in ancient times from that place? Because the sands always move, the sands always change. The Sahara 2,000 years ago was different than the Sahara we have now. So when a theory like his comes up, yeah, there might have been solar flare activity, but the thing he's wanting to have the solar flares make go away is too big to not leave something behind. You know, even, I mean, there's you know, influence all over the area of of people coming in and changing in some fashion what that worldview is. You know, you see that the Hellenistic period in Egypt, everything looks sort of Greek. Oh, because the Greeks are in charge. But at some point, that trade would show, you know, how did steel get to Europe if it started in the Middle East? Well, they didn't bring all the forges with them, but a guy with an idea did. A guy with the knowledge and the know-how did. There's a cultural influence right there that you can now track all the way through Europe. There's a cultural influence there that shows us where the Vikings landed in the Americas and how we're able to tell the site is not indigenous because they're working iron at the place in Newfoundland, or yes, Newfoundland, which of course I
don't know
can't.
the details of. Have you heard the story about the there's a slab with Nordic writing on it found in Minnesota?
The Kensington Rune Stone.
Is that yeah?
Yeah.
Is that legit? I mean,
it's a problem, you know, because
what was it? A
once
farmer
again
found this stone in his field. Is the background behind it, if I remember?
Yep,
right?
the farmer found this stone in his field, and it was apparently in a root ball. You know, a tree fell over and the roots are there, and the stone was taken away, so the provenience is gone. But the stone, when you look at the when you read it, yeah, it's in runes, it's runic, but it's missing. Like, it has a date on it, you know, it says this is the event that happened, but it's missing a bunch of the linguistic styles within that writing system that would have been indicative to the time period in a way that you don't see until later history. That's weird, but okay.
But is it far-fetched to think that Viking explorers, I mean, there's evidence they came to the East Coast and nowadays
I don't think it's far-fetched at all.
In Canada.
Considering how preeminent they were on the water and in inland waterways, just like in Europe, I don't see why they wouldn't. The evidence isn't there to say yes or no. Right now, it's just a hypothesis. And until we find absolute 100% evidence, it's just going to be a postulation. I mean, why stop at this one spot when it's not that far to continue going? But you also got to think of it in their minds. How far are you going to go without supplies? How far are you going to go into an area that might be hostile? You're not going to keep going if you see some people on the bank and they scream at you and shoot at you. You're not going to keep going lest there's more. You know, I've only got 50 guys in my boat. Oh, arrows took out 3 of them. I now have 47 guys in my boat and I can count 500 on the beach. I'm not going to go any further. You know, I will do my best to not interact with those people, you know. And when I go back, I will tell great stories about these people and obviously embellish it to show that I didn't just run away, which is where you get strailing. I know, right? But, you know, to think that they got all the way to Minnesota, once again, without the indigenous people noticing them. I know there are some stories, but if you look at the origins of some of those stories, or the localities, that they're all on the coast. They're not in Minnesota. They're not in Canada. Yeah. They're not in the northern part of the United States. They're all
living over here. The only stories we really talk about in elementary, middle school is the French fur trade in this area, because you had the Ojibwe and Chippewa tribes and a bunch of the Sioux, I think, farther west, but I'm not going to try to butcher any of that history, but the interactions between the traders and the tribes that were living here. But there's, well, albeit they didn't teach a whole lot of that history in, the
no, they taught the bare minimum. And
there's some people here and the interaction goes so well, but we didn't commit genocide, but we did. And but we did,
yeah. No, the Kensington Rune Stone is one of those things that if you look at all of the data that's come from it, the fact that rock is almost impossible to age, like a rock artifact. You can't carbon test it. If you find a rock artifact, you're going off of the provenience and the data that comes with it. If it doesn't have that, well, it could be, it also couldn't be. And there's that 50-50 mix, and you can't say yes or no. Though the writing style is conducive to the 17th, 18th, and 19th century. And that still occurred in Scandinavia, especially like on graves. It's missing a bunch of the specific alphabet indicators of its age. The language changes based on influences, based on slang. I mean, look at English. English changes every other day. Words are added, words are taken away. People go from saying are not to ain't. That if you didn't know what that word meant, if you didn't know where that came from, you would look at ain't and be like, where did this come from? This isn't English, this is something else. Well, you can see that in the writing. And then the kicker is that the guy who found it was a Norwegian immigrant from an area where they still utilize this character writing on gravestones. And it coincidentally is something he can read, which he was the one who said, this is Scandinavian and this is what it says. That's kind of one of those, it doesn't add up. And if it had been found in situ, if it had been found with anything else that could have been indicative of its actual provenience or its authenticity, I mean, it makes mention of a bunch of burials, a bunch of guys dead, and they buried them. Where are those? There's distinct possibilities. There's material culture there that could be found. All of that land, I'm pretty sure, has been tilled up, turned into farmland at some point. It would have been found by now, and it hasn't. And that's where, as much as it would be cool, yes, it'd be great. I mean, all of these ancient aliens would be great to find. Sasquatch would be great to find. There's a professor of archaeology in Vermont. His name's Ken Fader, and he does a podcast with a couple others and it's archaeological fantasies, debunking stuff like this. He's flat out said in at least one episode, and it struck me so much. I mean, it was like, maybe it was the only one clear part he said because the sound isn't that great, but archaeologists are nerds. We want this stuff to be real because we're nerds. There's just no evidence of it. So we're not going to get excited until we have evidence. But he pointed out something that was kind of proves the provenience of things being so required to date something is the tower that's in Maine or Massachusetts on the coast there. There's a castle. Have you heard of that?
No, I haven't.
The Newport Tower. And it's a round circular tower like you'd see in Europe. And nobody knows where it comes from. There's no records. No one knows who built it. And it's always been this big mystery. And it's been tied to, the Vikings built it. Or, early peoples, the Templars built it and all this stuff. Well, they did some excavations there. And underneath the structure, deeper than the structure, they found ceramics, which is great. Except that ceramic dates to the 1650s. Which means the tower was built sometime after, 1650, 1660, something like that. Well, looking into more historical documents, they stop looking for a tower and they start looking for a lighthouse. Boom, there it is. They find record of the guy who owned the property and made it. But you say, it's a mysterious tower, well, that's a better story and it sells more papers. So
so I was in the comment section a little while back and somebody brought up the the Chinese reaching to California.
Mhm.
And I remember you commented something that you weren't familiar with it. And I actually, I couldn't think of the right names at the time, but there's a running theory that I want to say Admiral
Zheng He.
Yes.
Zheng He, yeah.
Actually sailed to California, and there's theorized that there were records of that pre Mao Zedong when he did the cultural, what do you call it, cultural, not cultural reset, but whatever
Cleansing.
However he decided to word that, but
Um,
and because they found a Chinese junk off of the coast or something like that dated back so far to whatever time period, whatever dynasty.
Well, I've not heard of the junk being found. I know that the Chinese were capable of building very large ships. Because
not necessarily junk. I'm trying to send the hamster to the back of the Rolodex and archives in my brain of the random shit that I remember.
Well, I went over that because somebody asked me. Somebody also pointed out there's coin armor that was made by the Tinglet, I think, the indigenous peoples off the coast, or who live like on Vancouver Island, or on the coast there of British Columbia. And yes, there's Chinese coin armor because Chinese coins were not worth anything, and fur traders could get a lot of them. And you trade these coins, these worthless coins, to the indigenous people who don't have a use for coin, but they could turn it into something like scale armor, or they could sharpen them, pound them out to where they have a crude arrowhead or something like that. But that happens after European contact. The ships that have been turning up ancient, or have been turning up stuff from the Far East, are galleons. There's 2 galleons that are unaccounted for that could have wound up somewhere right off the coast. Like one's off of San Francisco, the other one's off of Northern Oregon, in theory. One of which is called the Beehive ship, or the Beehive wreck. And people keep saying that the indigenous peoples would swim off the coast, dive down to where this wreck is, and take the beeswax off it. Well, beeswax floats, so it makes sense that it washes up on the beach. But there has been this wax found, and they did DNA tests on it. It comes from bees in the Philippines. But the Spanish had trade networks all over the Eastern Pacific. All of the currents go clockwise in the Pacific. So it's very possible that a derelict Chinese ship was drifted all the way. There's that fishing boat that came across after Fukushima.
Mm-hmm.
Drifted on the current. Took it a couple years, but it made it. So, I mean, with the current system working like that, yes, it's possible that stuff got over here. The Chinese themselves, when Zheng He was admiral, they were making ships that were north of 300 feet long. There was a rudder post found in the Yangtze. They dredged it up during a project, and the rudder post was like 37 feet to turn this ship, which is insane. I mean, that the British haven't figured out 2 masts, and the Chinese are like, look at us, we have a rudder the size of a stadium, because hey, why not? But if again, it's one of those, there would be some sort of cultural exchange or genetic exchange, because humans like food, and they like fornication, and don't matter where you're from, that happens. So there would be a more recent addition of an Asian, genetic combination into the pool that could be tracked. But then also the question is why? You know, if you're getting all of your trade from the South China Sea and Southeast Asia there, why truck out across something that you don't know is on the other side?
To put the tinfoil hat on for a sec, make the argument of, a great king, if you air quotes, that time period, you go back to Roman times, all the way up to early Russian. If you expanded your land, that made you better than the last guy.
Oh yeah, that's the whole point of colonization.
It's like, okay, well, we've tapped all the resources here. We have all the trade routes we have here. We can't go east because of this, that, and the other thing. What's across the pond? Let's go check it out.
Well, could do. You also have to consider what was available at the time period in respect to ships, and you have to consider the people on the ships. It's easy to order somebody to go look. Columbus was in danger of being chucked off the ship himself. 5 weeks out or more. We haven't seen anything. You said we would have seen land 3 weeks ago. We haven't seen land. Water's running out, food's running out, and then land. There it is. But he almost got chucked overboard. I would be willing to say that it would be more possible for the Chinese to make it following the Ring of Fire, following up the coast and down, than it would be for the Mayan Empire to make it across to South America before Europeans did. Not saying that they couldn't. It makes more sense. It's like the Bering Strait, and I've said this before, is 55 miles across. You can sail a ship inside of land, inside of safety, the whole way, and you're not gonna get lost. Sailing directly out, there'll be monsters there. We're not counting superstitions. We're not counting the weather patterns they wouldn't be familiar with. When I pointed out that Tor Heyerdahl had an advantage in the Ra when he sailed across the Atlantic, even the first time when it sank. He sailed an Egyptian style ship across the Atlantic. Are we going to get there? Well, it's a grand idea. Even if he didn't bring them with him, even if he didn't have them with him, he knew which direction he was going. He had a base in the back of his head. This is how the winds are, because I've experienced them and I've learned about them somewhere else. This is what the currents do. This is, roughly this is what the weather patterns at this time of the year look like. That's all factors that nobody necessarily would have available to them back then. You can drift for a long time. And I've had people say, hey, what if they got shipwrecked? What if the storm blew them off course? Well, that's great. Now you're factoring in, did your supplies get contaminated? Do you have enough food? Is your ship damaged? Is it sinking? One of the longest drift, and Lee Song, I think the Chinese sailor in 1943, he was the only survivor of the ship that he was on, and he was on a raft which was made out of some oil drums and like a newspaper pallet with a frame above it. He had 3 tins of water and a couple of biscuits, and he was the only one to survive the torpedoing of a ship. He was adrift for 193 days, and I don't think he was more than 300 miles off the coast of Brazil. And he didn't see land until the last couple days of that, where he finally drifted up, and he almost died. He was very small. He was less than 100 pounds. He's eating raw fish and birds that he manages to catch, and recycling water through his own system and drinking it from what's left of a piece of canvas that's catching some water. And that's in modern times with ships going by, and he didn't get picked up. It's a tall order to say, hey, a bunch of people who are certainly not expecting this in a ship that would not be conducive to crossing an ocean, surviving a storm. Let's say they survive the storm, but landing the lucky dice to make it. And then it's also not, it's not necessarily counter, it's not including the fact that what if you get there and the people there don't like you? Everybody who says, the Africans got there and they influenced the Olmec to make the Olmec heads, or the Olmec themselves are African. How about all the other peoples who were there who they're well fed, they've got the power of numbers, they know the area. Well, what's to stop them from, if you piss them off because you don't know their culture, what's to stop them from just wiping you out to a person and then you were never there? There's a lot of factors that are not included when you look at, the hypothesis of people getting to the Americas at whenever, via whatever, are fine. Are you looking at all of the possibilities, all of the factors? The Vikings could have made it all the way to Florida. If you have a boat full of 50 Vikings and they piss off the Seminole and the Seminole kill them all, did Vikings make it to Florida? You can't say yes, you can't say no, until you find a Viking with a Seminole arrow through his noggin and he's buried on the beach and he says, I've been here since 825, and you're like, oh well, there you go. If someone went to court, if someone was convicted of a crime based on some of the evidence, on the quality of evidence that some of the ancient aliens people and the pseudoscience people count on, they would be screaming unfairness, and they'd be demanding a retrial, and they'd be fighting it till the day they died, claiming their innocence, because some of the stuff that people are just hanging their hat on, not only are they hanging their hat, they're hanging their whole coat on it. It just doesn't stand up. You go, okay, yes, this could be cool. Did you factor in this, and this? And they're like, oh, you're lying to me. And it's like, am I though? I mean, the cabal doesn't pay worth a damn. So, but yeah, it's interesting. Sorry, that was a ramble.
No worries. We're pushing 3 hours here, so just wanted to one last question
Sure.
that I close with everyone. So if there's somebody looking to get into the archaeology, anthropology fields, what advice would you throw up to them?
Well, obviously pick a good school. Pick a school that you want to go to. There's a difference between good schools and ones you want to go to. Research the programs first. I mean, look at what their specialty is. See if they have a focus. I mean, you're not going to learn about underwater archaeology at the University of North Dakota. You might want to go to Florida for that. See what they offer in respect to field work. You can be really book smart. You can be really, really, classroom smart. But the moment you get out in the field, you're going to find that, oh, I should have paid attention, or I should have done something different. If you're doing it, and if you're in the field, if you're in the program and you are enjoying what you're doing, go to the conferences, present papers. I can tell you this because I regret not doing some of this stuff. Take field schools, figure out how to do it. If finances are like, for me, they were an issue for me, if they're an issue for people who are looking, pull out some stops and try to sort it out. Do every internship you can. If work study is offered, if volunteer hours are offered, do them. And you might be busy and you might be pushing really hard to get everything done. You might be exhausted, but it can only help. It can only pad your resume, pad your CV. And when you are graduated and you are out looking for a job, if if you have 25 or 30 hours of lab experience and somebody sees that on your resume, they might go, hey, we're going to be excavating this site, and then we have to curate all of it. This person has a little bit of lab experience. This one doesn't. That might be the tipping point on who gets hired for that job. Be flexible. I know people who are very specific in what they do, and they're great at it. And they've been asked to do things on other projects, and they kind of go, I don't do that. In my mind, and from what I've seen, you know, if you're flexible, you learn more, and you continue to just improve on your toolkit of what you have in respect to knowledge and experience. Only buy a Marshalltown trowel, and a wide brim hat is always a good idea, especially in the sun. You know, and it doesn't have to be an Indiana Jones hat. I get so much crap for that. But you know, enjoy it. It's a very unique and rewarding job. I love it. I'm not going to get rich off of it. Yeah, it's not a job for people who want money, but it is something that it's profound in what you get to be a part of sometimes. I mean, sorting through rusty cans at an old mining site is one thing, but being able to experience the return of ancestors to tribal groups, or see something that hasn't been seen in, you know, 5,000 years, and hold it in your hands is pretty intense. It's pretty amazing. So the more work you put into it, the more you'll get from it, and it's great, every bit of it. So
well, thank you again for taking time to be on
thanks
the show.
for having me.
I got some stories I can tell you off air. There's some stuff.
Oh, sure.
There's some things I can't mention on here.
Oh, sure.
But appreciate it. Thank you. And thank you for everyone tuning into Twitch, and we'll catch you next time.
Yeah. Thanks. This has been fun.